Have you ever wondered why some stories, no matter how old they get, never lose their power to send a shiver down your spine? There's a strange and compelling magic in the tales that have been whispered around campfires and passed down through generations, stories that feel less like fiction and more like echoes from a past we can't quite explain. These aren't just simple ghost stories. They are fragments of history wrapped in shadow, mysteries that challenge our understanding of the world and remind us that some questions might never have answers. It's that tantalizing blend of known history and unexplained phenomena that keeps us coming back, searching for clues in the dark. Today, we are embarking on a journey to explore 30 of the most eerie myths and legends from history, a collection of global tales that have captivated and terrified people for centuries. We will travel from the misty highlands of Scotland to the dense jungles of South America, from ancient ruins to forgotten coastlines, uncovering the historical origins and chilling details behind each legend. You will encounter spectral ships crewed by the damned, haunted castles where time itself seems to stand still, and ancient curses that allegedly brought down empires. These are the stories that linger at the edge of our collective memory, refusing to be forgotten. So, find a comfortable spot, maybe turn down the lights just a little, and prepare to be both fascinated and perhaps a little unsettled. This is more than just a list. It's an invitation to look into the shadows of our past and confront the mysteries that history books often leave out. Whether these legends are cautionary tales, misinterpreted events, or something far more inexplicable, their enduring power is a testament to humanity's endless fascination with the unknown. Let's begin our descent into the captivating and eerie world of historical mysteries, starting with a legend born from the cold, unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic. Our journey begins not in a haunted castle or a misty forest, but within the dazzling, treacherous world of high-stakes gemstones, with an object of such breathtaking beauty it seems to defy the very darkness it supposedly carries. This is the story of the Hope Diamond, a 45-carat deep blue jewel with a reputation as one of the most cursed objects on Earth. Its tale starts deep underground in the 17th century in the Kolar mine of Golconda, India. According to legend, the original, larger stone was pried from the forehead of a sacred statue of the Hindu goddess Sita, an act of sacrilege that immediately invoked a powerful curse upon anyone who would thereafter possess it. Whether this specific theft is fact or folklore, the stone's journey into the wider world was certainly paved with misfortune. The French gem merchant Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, who is credited with bringing the diamond to Europe, supposedly met a gruesome end, his body torn apart by wild animals, a fate many saw as the curse's first manifestation. The diamond soon found its way into the opulent court of King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, who had it recut and set into a cravat pin. From here, the curse seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of French royalty. The king's reign, once the pinnacle of absolute power, ended in agony as he succumbed to a gangrenous disease. His successor, Louis XV, also possessed the stone, and his reign was marked by financial despair and political decline. Most famously, the diamond was worn by Queen Marie Antoinette, who, according to some accounts, lent it to a friend, the Princess de Lamballe, just before the French Revolution. The gruesome fates of both women, the queen beheaded by the guillotine and the princess brutally murdered by a revolutionary mob, became central pillars of the diamond's dark legend. The royal treasury was looted during the revolution, and the blue diamond vanished, only to resurface decades later in England with a new, ominous name. Its next prominent chapter unfolded across the Atlantic with American heiress Evelyn Walsh McLean. She bought the diamond in the early 1900s, fully aware of its sinister reputation but believing herself immune to its power. She even had it reset into a lavish necklace surrounded by white diamonds. Tragically, the curse appeared to follow her home. Her firstborn son died in a car accident, her daughter succumbed to a suicide, her husband cheated on her and was eventually declared insane, confined to a mental institution until his death. The family's vast fortune evaporated, and Evelyn herself died penniless from pneumonia, her estate forced to sell the diamond to settle her debts. The subsequent owner, jeweler Harry Winston, eventually donated the stone to the Smithsonian Institution in 1958, reportedly sending it through the U.S. mail in a plain brown wrapper for just $155 in postage and insurance, a remarkably mundane end for such a legendary object. So, what are we to make of this long history of tragedy? Skeptics offer compelling scientific explanations, suggesting the diamond may contain trace amounts of radioactive elements like boron, which give it that unique blue glow but could, in theory, emit low levels of radiation. Prolonged exposure, they argue, might have contributed to the illness and mental decline of some of its wearers. Others point to the simpler, more powerful force of confirmation bias. Once the diamond's cursed reputation was established, every subsequent piece of bad luck was viewed through that lens, while any good fortune was ignored. Yet, despite these rational theories, the legend endures. The Hope Diamond now rests safely behind bulletproof glass at the Smithsonian, where it is one of the most visited objects in the world. Millions of people gaze upon its deep blue brilliance, drawn not just by its beauty, but by the chilling possibility that they are looking into the heart of a centuries-old curse, a tangible piece of history that reminds us that some treasures might come with a price too terrible to pay. From the glittering curse of a blue gem, we now turn to a far more spectral and restless kind of treasure, a ghost ship forever lost upon the open sea. Emerging from the foggy annals of maritime history, the legend of the Flying Dutchman stands as one of the most enduring and chilling tales of the ocean's mysteries. This is not a story of a cursed object, but of an entire vessel and its crew, condemned for eternity to never make port, a permanent and terrifying fixture in the lore of sailors across the centuries. The core of the legend is always the same, a phantom ship glowing with an unearthly light, its sails perpetually full of wind even when the air is deathly still, seen racing against the horizon or heading directly into an impossible storm. To spot this ship was considered a dire omen, a harbinger of catastrophe, warning sailors that their own voyage was likely doomed. The most famous origin story places the Dutchman's damnation in the tumultuous waters off the Cape of Good Hope, a passage so notoriously treacherous that sailors once called it the Cape of Storms. According to this version, the ship was commanded by a stubborn and arrogant Dutch captain named Hendrik van der Decken. In the 17th century, he was attempting to round the Cape during a violent storm that threatened to tear his vessel apart. His crew, terrified and exhausted, begged him to turn back and seek shelter, but the captain, in a fit of pride and perhaps madness, refused. He swore a blasphemous oath, vowing that he would round the Cape even if it took him until the day of judgment. Some tales say he challenged God himself to stop him, sealing his fate with his own defiance. For this act of hubris, the divine punishment was swift and absolute. The captain and his entire crew were cursed to sail the oceans forever, never to know the peace of land again, their ship becoming a permanent ghost upon the waves. But this is just one of many chilling origin tales that have swirled around the Dutchman for hundreds of years. Another haunting variation suggests the ship was not damned by a captain's oath, but by a far more visceral horror. In this account, the vessel was a trading ship returning from the exotic East when a terrible plague broke out amongst the sailors. Fearful that the sickness would spread to their home ports, authorities denied the ship permission to land anywhere. The Flying Dutchman was thus transformed into a floating tomb, forced to wander the seas with its dead and dying crew. A leper ship of the ocean forever denied the mercy of a final rest. This version taps into a deep, primal fear of contagion and isolation, making the ghost ship not just a symbol of punishment, but also one of profound tragedy and abandonment. The legend's power was so immense that it transcended sailors' yarns and found a permanent home in broader culture. The composer Richard Wagner immortalized the tale in his epic 1843 opera, Der Fliegende Holländer, which delved deep into the themes of redemption and a captain who can only be released from his curse by finding true love once every 7 years. Centuries later, the blockbuster Pirates of the Caribbean films brought a terrifying and visually stunning version of the Dutchman to a global audience, portraying it as a ship crewed by seamen who had slowly become part of the vessel itself, a terrifying fusion of man, wood, and sea creature, eternally bound to their duty of ferrying souls to the afterlife. These artistic interpretations, while taking creative liberties, prove the story's incredible adaptability and its hold on our collective imagination. So, what might a sailor have actually seen in those moments they believed they were witnessing the Flying Dutchman? Science offers a compelling and fascinating explanation rooted in the strange behavior of light over water. The phenomenon known as fata morgana is a complex form of mirage that can occur under specific atmospheric conditions, where a layer of warm air sits atop a layer of much cooler air. This acts like a giant lens in the sky, bending and distorting light. A real ship that is actually far beyond the physical horizon can have its image stretched, inverted, and lifted into the air, creating the apparition of a ghostly, towering ship floating impossibly above the water or sailing in a place where no ship could possibly be. To a superstitious crew already nervous in a treacherous stretch of sea, this optical illusion would have been more than enough to confirm the terrifying legends they had heard their entire lives. Yet, even with this rational explanation, the legend of the Flying Dutchman endures. It serves as a powerful, multi-layered warning from a bygone era of exploration. It cautioned against the sin of hubris, the danger of defying both nature and the divine. It represented the ever-present threat of disease and the terrifying prospect of being cast out from society. But on a deeper level, it is a profound symbol of eternal punishment, a fate considered worse than death for any sailor. The endless voyage, forever close to home but never able to arrive, a silent, glowing reminder that some mistakes can never be undone. Leaving the cold, restless seas behind, we find ourselves deep in the heart of the American frontier, where a different kind of haunting took root, one not of a ship but of a family, and an entity so uniquely cruel and intelligent it would become the most famous poltergeist story in United States history. This is the legend of the Bell Witch, a torment that began in the rural community of Adams, Tennessee, around the year 1817, targeting farmer John Bell and his family with a violence that was as personal as it was inexplicable. The disturbances started subtly, with faint knocking sounds on the doors and walls of their log cabin, sounds that could perhaps be dismissed as the settling of wood or the wind. But these noises quickly escalated into something far more sinister. The family began to hear the sounds of rats gnawing at the bedposts, chains being dragged across the floor, and gasping, choking noises that seemed to come from the very air around them. Soon, the invisible force began physically attacking the family, particularly John Bell, pulling his hair, slapping his face, and even yanking the covers off his bed at night. What set the Bell Witch apart from a simple ghost story was the entity's terrifying intelligence and seemingly omniscient knowledge. It developed a voice, a range of whispers and shrieks that eventually coalesced into a coherent, if monstrous, personality. This witch could recite sermons being preached miles away simultaneously and relay private conversations that neighbors had held in their own homes. It appeared to know everything about everyone, a trait that paralyzed the community with fear. This was not a mindless, repeating phantom. It was an interactive, vengeful intelligence. Its motivations were a bizarre and unsettling mix of pure malice and peculiar affection. The entity held a vicious hatred for John Bell, its torment of him culminating in what was described as his poisoning, with the witch itself claiming credit for dosing him with a mysterious vial of liquid that led to his tragic death. Yet at the same time, it displayed a strange, protective fondness for John's daughter, Betsy Bell. While it often disrupted her life and once even prevented her marriage by ruthlessly tormenting her fiancé, it also defended her from others and spoke to her with a twisted sense of care, creating a deeply confusing and psychologically torturous dynamic within the household. The fame of the haunting spread like wildfire across the frontier, drawing the curious and the brave from miles around. Its most famous visitor was none other than the future president, Andrew Jackson, a man known for his toughness and skepticism. Intrigued by the stories, Old Hickory reportedly decided to investigate for himself, journeying to the Bell farm with a party of companions. According to the legend, Jackson's wagon came to an abrupt halt just as it entered the property, its wheels locking up as if frozen solid. A voice then whispered from the bushes, "All right, General, let the wagon move." The moment the voice finished speaking, the wagon was free to move again. This display of power was enough for the battle-hardened general. It's said that Andrew Jackson and his entire party promptly turned around and fled the farm, with Jackson later declaring he would rather fight the entire British army than face the Bell Witch. So what truly haunted the Bell family? Over the years, numerous theories have attempted to explain this foundational piece of American folklore. One of the most persistent suggests it was an elaborate, long-running hoax orchestrated by a neighbor, a man named Richard Powell. Powell was a schoolteacher who was deeply in love with the young Betsy Bell and held a known grudge against her father, John. Skeptics propose that Powell used his intelligence and knowledge of the area to fabricate the entire phenomenon, perhaps using ventriloquism and secret passages to create the sounds and physical effects, all in a convoluted plot to either win Betsy's hand or drive John Bell to his grave. Another compelling theory points to the psychological phenomenon of mass hysteria. The isolated, superstitious nature of frontier life, combined with the power of suggestion, could have caused the entire family and community to interpret a series of natural sounds and events through a supernatural lens, effectively creating the haunting through their own collective belief and fear. Yet, despite these rational investigations, the story of the Bell Witch endures with remarkable power. It was one of the first American ghost stories to be extensively documented by witnesses in written accounts, giving it a veneer of historical credibility that few other tales possess. It taps into universal fears of the unseen, the violation of the home, and the terror of an intelligence that knows our most private thoughts. The legend also serves as a dark reflection of frontier life, where isolation, family conflicts, and the struggle for survival could boil over into something the community could only explain as a witch. The cave on the old Bell property, said to be the entity's home, remains a site of pilgrimage for paranormal investigators and the curious to this day, a testament to a story that, true or not, has permanently etched itself into the landscape of American mystery. From the psychological terror of a family haunting, we now shift to a more visceral and tangible fear that literally descended from the sky, a creature that turned a small West Virginia town into the epicenter of a modern myth. The legend of the Mothman began in earnest on a chilly November night in 1966, when two young couples from Point Pleasant were driving near a former World War II munitions site known locally as the Tinty area. As their car's headlights cut through the darkness, they saw something impossible. A tall, man-sized figure standing in the middle of the road, but this was no ordinary man. As they described it, the creature had massive, folded wings on its back and, most terrifyingly, glowing red eyes set deep in its head. When it unfurled its wings and took to the air, it didn't just fly. It ascended vertically with incredible speed, keeping pace with their speeding car as they fled in terror toward the local sheriff's office. This single report was the spark that ignited a firestorm of fear and fascination that would grip Point Pleasant for over a year. The initial sighting was far from an isolated incident. Over the next 13 months, dozens upon dozens of other residents came forward with their own terrifying encounters. Witnesses consistently described a gray, humanoid form, standing between 6 and 7 feet tall with a wingspan of 10 feet or more. Its flight was often reported as being unnaturally fast and maneuverable, capable of sudden, jet-like acceleration and sharp turns that defied the physics of any known bird. The creature's most haunting feature, however, was always its eyes, those piercing, hypnotic red orbs that seemed to burn with an internal light. The encounters weren't just visual. Many reported experiencing intense feelings of dread beforehand, and some drivers claimed the creature would swoop down over their vehicles, its vast shadow blotting out the moon and stars. The local police were inundated with calls, and newspaper headlines screamed about the Mothman and the Winged Wonder, a name borrowed from the popular Batman television series of the era. The phenomenon became a media circus, drawing curious visitors and paranormal investigators to the small town, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive creature. Then, on December 15, 1967, the terror reached its horrifying climax. During the evening rush hour, the Silver Bridge, a vital connection between Point Pleasant and Ohio, collapsed without warning into the icy waters of the Ohio River. 46 people lost their lives in the tragedy, a catastrophic event that forever scarred the community. In the aftermath, a chilling connection was immediately made. Many of the Mothman sightings had ceased abruptly after the bridge fell. This led to a powerful and enduring belief that the creature was not merely a random monster, but a specific harbinger of doom. Author John Keel, who had been in Point Pleasant investigating the sightings, cemented this idea in his best-selling 1975 book, The Mothman Prophecies. He wove a complex narrative connecting the creature to premonitions, men in black, and other strange phenomena, framing the Mothman not as a biological entity but as a paranormal omen sent to warn of the impending disaster. Of course, such a bizarre series of events naturally invites rational explanations. The most prominent theory points to a simple case of mistaken identity. At the time of the sightings, the region was home to a significant population of sandhill cranes. These are very large birds, standing up to 5 feet tall with wingspans that can exceed 7 feet. When seen in poor light or from an unexpected angle, a sandhill crane, especially one with reddish staining around its eyes, could easily be misinterpreted as a monstrous, red-eyed humanoid. Other skeptics suggest the possibility of an escaped or misidentified barred owl, whose broad, flat face and dark, forward-facing eyes can appear eerily human-like in a fleeting glance. The heightened anxiety and media attention, they argue, created a classic feedback loop of mass hysteria, where ordinary sights and sounds were reinterpreted through a lens of collective fear. Yet another layer of intrigue surrounds the TNT area itself, the focal point of many sightings. This secluded zone, with its network of abandoned igloo-shaped munitions bunkers, was not just a spooky location, it was also a place of intense speculation. Some theorists have proposed that the Mothman was not a creature of folklore, but the result of secret military or psychological experiments. Could the government have been testing advanced aircraft or engaging in sensory manipulation that triggered shared hallucinations? While there is no concrete evidence to support this, the theory persists, adding a cloak and dagger element to the legend that appeals to our fears of clandestine power. Regardless of its true origin, the Mothman has far outgrown its West Virginia roots to become a permanent fixture in modern mythology. The creature has been featured in video games, comic books, and a major Hollywood film adaptation of Keel's book, solidifying its status as a pop culture icon. For the town of Point Pleasant, the legend has been embraced as a unique, if somber, part of its identity. The community now hosts an annual Mothman festival, featuring a towering metal statue of the creature in the town center, and a dedicated museum attracts tourists from around the world. The Mothman endures because it represents a very modern kind of mystery, one documented in police reports and newspaper clippings, yet forever just beyond the reach of a definitive explanation. It is a symbol of the fear that can grip an entire community, a reminder that even in the age of science and reason, the unknown can still descend from the sky with glowing red eyes and change a town forever. Shifting from the skies of West Virginia to the frozen, forbidding slopes of Russia's Ural Mountains, we encounter a mystery so profound and chilling that it has defied explanation for over half a century. This is the Dyatlov Pass incident, a true story that reads like a horror novel, made all the more terrifying because every gruesome detail is documented fact. In the winter of 1959, a team of 9 experienced hikers, all students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute led by Igor Dyatlov, embarked on a challenging trek through the northern Urals. These were not novices, they were skilled, hardy mountaineers well prepared for the brutal conditions, but something went catastrophically wrong. When they failed to send a scheduled telegram, concerned family members initiated a search party. What the rescuers found weeks later at their campsite on the slope of Kolotsiak, a name which ominously translates to Mountain of the Dead, would become the stuff of international legend. The scene was one of utter chaos and profound contradiction. The group's tent was discovered half buried in the snow, but it had been slit open from the inside, as if the inhabitants had torn their way out in a desperate, panicked rush. Their belongings, warm coats, boots, and supplies, were left neatly inside. Following a trail of footprints, some made by bare or stocking-clad feet, the search party located the first 5 bodies under a large cedar tree about a mile away from the tent. These hikers had died of hypothermia, dressed only in their undergarments, as if they had fled their shelter in a state of undress, incapable of feeling the lethal cold. A small, makeshift fire had been attempted, suggesting a struggle for survival that lasted for some time. But the mystery only deepened with the discovery of the remaining 4 hikers, whose bodies were found months later, buried deeper in the snow in a ravine. It was the condition of these last 4 that transformed the incident from a tragic mountaineering accident into an enduring enigma. 3 of them had sustained massive, fatal internal injuries, shattered ribs, punctured lungs, and catastrophic chest trauma that one forensic expert described as similar to the damage caused by the impact of a car crash. Astonishingly, there were no corresponding external wounds, as if the force had been applied with immense, focused pressure. Even more bizarrely, one of the women, Lyudmila Dubinina, was found missing her tongue along with her eyes and part of her lips. While this gruesome detail could be explained by natural scavenging and decomposition, it added a layer of visceral horror to the scene. Crucially, there were no signs of a struggle with another human party, no footprints from outsiders anywhere near the camp, and the hikers' own diaries recovered from the tent recounted a normal, if arduous, expedition up until their final fateful night. The sheer strangeness of the evidence has spawned a staggering array of theories, each attempting to piece together the puzzle. One of the earliest and most sensational explanations pointed to an attack by the local Mansi people or even a mythical Yeti. However, this was quickly dismissed. The absence of any other footprints and the nature of the internal injuries made a human or animal attack highly improbable. A more compelling theory involves secret Soviet military testing. The area was off-limits to civilians at the time, and some researchers have suggested the hikers may have stumbled upon a weapons test, perhaps involving parachute mines or a sonic device, which could explain the internal injuries and their panicked flight. Reports from other hikers in the region of strange, glowing orange spheres in the sky around the same time have further fueled speculation about covert activity. Scientists have proposed several natural, albeit terrifying, possibilities. One prominent theory centers on the phenomenon of infrasound low-frequency sound waves generated by powerful winds interacting with the mountain's unique topography. These inaudible waves can induce feelings of intense dread, panic, and even visceral terror in humans, potentially causing the hikers to slash their way out of the tent and flee into the sub-zero wilderness in a blind, irrational state of fear. Another, more recent and widely discussed theory suggests a rare and specific type of slab avalanche. Researchers have posited that an unusual cut the hikers made into the slope to pitch their tent, combined with strong winds later that night, could have triggered a delayed avalanche. This avalanche wouldn't have been a massive wall of snow, but a dense, hard slab that could have fractured and fallen on the tent, causing the crushing internal injuries and forcing the already injured survivors to crawl away to their eventual deaths from exposure. Despite these plausible scientific theories, no single explanation fully accounts for every bizarre detail. The official Soviet investigation was abruptly closed, concluding only that the hikers met their death due to a compelling natural force, a vague and unsatisfying verdict that has only deepened the mystery. The case remains officially unsolved, a cold case file that continues to captivate criminologists, scientists, and amateur sleuths alike. The Dyatlov Pass incident forces us to confront the possibility that in our modern, mapped world, there are still remote corners where reality can break down into something inexplicable. It is a story of competent, ordinary people caught in an extraordinary and lethal event, a stark reminder that nature, or perhaps something else, can still produce a mystery that refuses to yield its secrets. From the frozen, unresolved tragedy of Dyatlov Pass, we travel back in time to an earlier age of exploration and venture to the coast of what is now North Carolina, where a different kind of disappearance unfolded, one that left behind a single, cryptic word and launched one of America's oldest and most perplexing historical puzzles. The story of the Roanoke colony is the foundational ghost story of English America, a tale not of a haunting specter, but of an entire community that simply vanished into the wilderness. In the 1580s, England was desperate to catch up with its Spanish rivals in the race to colonize the New World. Sir Walter Raleigh sponsored an expedition to establish a permanent settlement on Roanoke Island, a vital foothold from which to launch privateering raids on Spanish treasure ships and to produce valuable goods like pitch, tar, and wine. The first attempt in 1585 was short-lived, the colonists, facing food shortages and tense relations with the Secottan people, abandoned the site and hitched a ride back to England with none other than Sir Francis Drake, who happened to be sailing by after a successful raid in the Caribbean. Undaunted, a second, larger group of 115 men, women, and children set sail in 1587, this time led by artist and mapmaker John White, who was also appointed the colony's governor. This group was different. It included families, with White's own pregnant daughter, Elena Dare, among them. She would soon give birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. The colony's purpose was to establish a lasting, self-sustaining community, but from the beginning their timing was disastrous. They arrived too late in the season to plant crops, and their supplies were woefully insufficient. Faced with a desperate situation just weeks after landing, the colonists persuaded John White to sail back to England to secure more provisions and reinforcements. It was a decision that would haunt him forever. White's return journey was thwarted by a colossal historical roadblock, the Spanish Armada. Every seaworthy English ship was commandeered for the national defense against the impending invasion, stranding White in England for 3 agonizing years. When he finally managed to secure passage and return to Roanoke in August of 1590, he found the settlement utterly deserted. The houses had been carefully dismantled, suggesting a planned, unhurried departure, not a panicked flight. There were no signs of a struggle, no cross markings to indicate distress, and most curiously, no human remains. The only clues were 2 cryptic carvings. On a wooden post at the entrance to the abandoned fort, the word Croatoan was carved in capital letters. On a nearby tree, the letters Crow were found. This was not a random scrawl. White had pre-arranged a contingency plan with the colonists before he left. If they were forced to move, they were to carve a Maltese cross into a tree to signal they were under attack. The absence of that cross and the presence of the word Croatoan suggested to White that they had relocated voluntarily to Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras Island, the home of a nearby Algonquian-speaking tribe that had been generally friendly to the English. But here the trail goes cold. A sudden, violent storm was brewing, and the ship's captain refused to sail south to Croatoan Island, forcing White to return to England without ever learning the fate of his family and fellow colonists. He would never set foot in America again. So, what really happened to the 115 souls of the Lost Colony, the most widely accepted theory, and the one that John White himself believed, is that the colonists simply integrated with the Croatan people. Facing starvation and unable to hold out for a rescue that was years overdue, it is entirely plausible that they sought refuge and assimilation with their indigenous neighbors. This theory is supported by decades of intriguing, if circumstantial, evidence. In the early 1700s, reports from English explorers described encounters with native tribes in interior North Carolina who spoke English, practiced Christianity, and had gray eyes, traits that were interpreted as evidence of mixed ancestry. One specific account tells of a tribe that claimed descent from white ancestors and who could read from an English Bible. A more sinister theory suggests the colonists fell victim to hostile forces. The Spanish, who considered the English settlement an illegal intrusion, had indeed sent a reconnaissance mission to find and destroy it in 1588. That mission failed to locate the colony, but it's possible a later, unrecorded Spanish attack wiped them out. Alternatively, they may have been attacked by the neighboring Secotan tribe, with whom relations had soured during the first colonization attempt. However, the lack of any evidence of a battle or massacre at the site makes this theory less compelling than the integration hypothesis. Another possibility is that the colonists attempted to sail back to England on their own in small boats and were lost at sea, or that they tried to move north toward the Chesapeake Bay, their original intended destination, and perished from disease or starvation along the way. Modern archaeological work has added fascinating new layers to the mystery. Excavations on Hatteras Island have uncovered a mix of English and Native American artifacts from the correct time period, including a rapier handle, a slate writing tablet, and a gold ring that may have belonged to one of the colonists. Meanwhile, a separate archaeological site on the mainland, over 50 miles inland, has yielded another compelling collection of Elizabethan-era objects, such as a bale seal used for cloth and pieces of gun hardware. This has led to a new split theory that the colony may have divided into two groups, with one assimilating with the Croatan on the coast and another moving inland to live with a different, friendly tribe. The enduring power of the Roanoke story lies in its perfect storm of historical circumstances. It was a disappearance that occurred at the very dawn of English America, leaving a vacuum in the national origin story that has been filled with centuries of speculation. It represents the terrifying fragility of those early colonial ventures, where a thread of communication across an ocean could be so easily severed, leaving an entire community to be swallowed by a vast, unknown continent. The single word, Croatoan, is not an answer but a profound and lasting question, a ghost of a colony that continues to whisper from the shores of history. But as the English colonists vanished into the mist of North America, a different kind of conflict was brewing in the heartland, one that would give rise to a political legend so persistent it seems to haunt the very rhythm of American democracy itself. This is the Curse of Tippecanoe, also known as Tecumseh's Curse, a purported supernatural retaliation that for over a century struck down every U.S. president elected in a year ending with 0. The story begins not in the White House but in the Indiana Territory in the early 1800s, amidst the bitter tensions between Native American tribes and the relentless westward expansion of American settlers. At the center of this conflict was a brilliant Shawnee leader, Tecumseh, and his brother, a spiritual leader known as Tenskwatawa or the Prophet. Together, they sought to forge a powerful confederacy of tribes to resist the encroachment, arguing that the land was a shared possession of all native people and could not be sold by any single tribe. Their headquarters was a vibrant village called Prophetstown, situated at the junction of the Tippecanoe and Wabash rivers, which became a symbol of unified resistance. The catalyst for the legend was the Battle of Tippecanoe in November 1811. William Henry Harrison, the governor of the Indiana Territory and a seasoned military officer, marched a force of over 1,000 men to Prophetstown, ostensibly for negotiations, but with the clear intention of breaking the growing confederacy. While Tecumseh was away recruiting more tribes, Harrison's army camped near the village. Tenskwatawa, perhaps seeking to demonstrate his spiritual power, ordered a pre-dawn attack on Harrison's encampment. The battle was fierce and bloody, with significant casualties on both sides, but Harrison's troops ultimately held their ground and forced the native warriors to retreat. The U.S. Army then marched on Prophetstown and destroyed it, a devastating blow to the Confederacy's morale and supplies. It was in the bitter aftermath of this defeat and the broken treaties that followed that the curse was allegedly born. While Tecumseh himself was a renowned diplomat and warrior who likely favored political and military strategy over supernatural threats, legend holds that either he or his brother called upon the Great Spirit to bring a dark justice, vowing that Harrison would never finish his term and that every American president elected every 20 years thereafter would likewise die in office. The pattern that followed is so striking it can send a chill down the spine of any history enthusiast. The curse seemingly claimed its first victim just as predicted. William Henry Harrison, elected in the 0 year of 1840, gave a famously long inauguration speech on a cold, wet day without a coat or hat. He developed pneumonia and died just 31 days into his term, becoming the first president to die in office. The grim cycle then continued for over a century. Abraham Lincoln, elected in 1860, was assassinated in his second term. James A. Garfield, elected in 1880, was shot by a disgruntled office seeker and died after months of suffering. William McKinley, elected for his second term in 1900, was assassinated by an anarchist. Warren G. Harding, elected in 1920, died of a sudden heart attack or stroke in office amidst swirling scandals. Franklin D. Roosevelt, elected for his third term in 1940, succumbed to a cerebral hemorrhage in his fourth term. And finally, John F. Kennedy, the vibrant young president elected in 1960, was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. 7 presidents elected at 20-year intervals, all dying while serving, creating an uncanny pattern that seemed to defy mere chance. So, are we looking at a powerful supernatural vendetta? Or is this a spectacular example of coincidence amplified by human psychology? Skeptics and statisticians have a field day with this one. They point out that from 1840 through 1960, the United States had 6 0-year election cycles where the winner died in office. That's a terrifying pattern. However, if you expand the scope, you see a different picture. Before Harrison, no president elected in a 0 year had died in office. And after Kennedy, the pattern was broken. Ronald Reagan, elected in 1980, survived a serious assassination attempt by John Hinckley Jr. and George W. Bush, elected in 2000, also survived his 2 terms despite global turmoil and security threats. The curse, it seems, lost its power. From a statistical standpoint, given the high-stress nature of the presidency and the fact that over 8% of U.S. presidents have died in office, a run of fatalities within a specific electoral pattern, while unusual, is not entirely improbable. Furthermore, the causes of death varied widely from illness to assassination, which doesn't point to a single cursed mechanism. The true power of the curse of Tippecanoe lies not in its supernatural authenticity, but in its profound narrative appeal. It provides a compelling, almost poetic framework for understanding national tragedy, linking historical injustice to a rhythmic, karmic retribution. It transforms a series of unrelated, tragic events into a cohesive story, one that suggests a moral order to the universe where broken promises have long-lasting consequences. The curse also taps into a deep-seated human tendency known as pattern recognition. Our brains are hardwired to find meaningful connections in random data, a survival skill that sometimes leads us to see intentional designs where none exist. The moment Ronald Reagan survived his assassination attempt, the spell of the curse was psychologically broken for the American public. His survival, followed by Bush's, allowed the legend to transition from a terrifying prophecy to a fascinating historical footnote, a story we can now tell about a time when it seemed the ghost of Tecumseh himself was casting a long shadow over the Oval Office, a reminder of a bitter past that the nation could not easily outrun. Now, let's pivot from curses on political figures to a conspiracy theory that targets the very fabric of history itself. A notion so audacious it questions whether nearly 300 years of our past are nothing but an elaborate fiction. This is the phantom time hypothesis, a controversial idea put forward by German historian Herbert Illig in the 1990s. Illig's radical proposal is that the period between the years 614 and 911 Anno Domini was completely invented, a grand forgery inserted into the timeline by powerful medieval conspirators. Imagine nearly 3 centuries of emperors, battles, and architectural achievements simply not existing. According to this theory, we are not living in the 2024. We are actually somewhere closer to the early 1700s, and a massive chunk of what we accept as the early Middle Ages is a chronological ghost. The evidence Illig and his supporters point to is a collection of perceived gaps and oddities. One of their central arguments revolves around the Gregorian calendar reform of 1582. As you may know, the old Julian calendar had slowly drifted out of sync with the solar year. To correct this, Pope Gregory XIII ordered that 10 days be skipped. Illig argued that the mathematical correction should have been larger. His calculations suggested that the drift over the centuries warranted a correction of about 13 days, not 10. He proposed that this 3-day discrepancy is a direct result of those 297 phantom years that were artificially added to history, creating a gap that was never accounted for in the calendar adjustment. This mathematical hiccup is a cornerstone of the hypothesis, presented as a smoking gun hidden in plain sight within our own dating system. Beyond the calendar, proponents highlight what they see as a startling lack of substantial archaeological evidence from this specific period in Europe. They argue that the architecture, art, and material culture that supposedly span these 3 centuries show a stylistic consistency that is suspiciously seamless, lacking the clear evolutionary development you would expect over such a long stretch of time. Additionally, they point to historical figures like Charlemagne, the great Frankish emperor crowned in the year 800. Illig suggests that the legendary king's story is a composite, a romanticized fabrication woven together from the tales of other rulers and exaggerated to fill the void of the invented timeline. His vast empire a myth designed to give a glorious past to later political entities. The theory even dips into Eastern history, suggesting that the sparse documentation in Byzantium and other regions during this era supports the idea of a global chronological void. Unsurprisingly, mainstream historians and scholars from every relevant field have thoroughly and systematically dismantled the phantom time hypothesis. Let's start with the calendar reform. Experts in historical astronomy explain that Illig's calculation is fundamentally flawed. He incorrectly used the beginning of the Christian era as his starting point, but the Council of Nicaea in 325 is the actual astronomical benchmark for calculating the Julian calendar's drift. When you use the correct starting date, the 10-day adjustment in 1582 is perfectly accurate, leaving no room for phantom centuries. The math simply doesn't support the conspiracy. The archaeological and historical record is even more damning to the theory. This period is far from a dark void. It is rich with well-documented events that are corroborated by multiple, independent sources from cultures that had no contact with each other. For instance, while Charlemagne's reign falls squarely within the supposed Phantom period, his rule and its impacts are meticulously recorded in Frankish annals, Anglo-Saxon chronicles, and even in the correspondence of the papacy. More definitively, we have events outside of Europe that are precisely dated and align perfectly with the standard timeline. The expansion of the Tang dynasty in China, the Islamic Golden Age, and the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid in Baghdad, and the construction of monumental structures like the Borobudur Temple in Indonesia. All of these are firmly anchored in the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries and are verified by their own extensive historical and archaeological records. It is astronomically improbable that every civilization across the globe would conspire to invent the exact same block of time. So why does such a thoroughly debunked idea continue to captivate a segment of the population? The allure of the phantom time hypothesis taps into something deep within the human psyche. It is the ultimate conspiracy theory because it doesn't just question a single event, it questions the entire framework of our recorded past. This offers a thrilling sense of intellectual rebellion, the idea that you alone or a small group of free thinkers have uncovered a secret that has fooled all the experts and institutions for centuries. It transforms history from a complex, sometimes messy discipline into a neat and solvable puzzle. Furthermore, it provides a strangely comforting explanation for the so-called Dark Ages, a period often perceived as a confusing regression. By simply erasing it, the theory creates a more direct and flattering lineage from the classical world to the Renaissance, skipping over the complexities and setbacks that actually occurred. Ultimately, the phantom time hypothesis is less about history and more about our relationship with authority and knowledge. It reminds us that our understanding of the past is a constructed narrative, and for some, the possibility that this narrative could be completely wrong is an irresistible and thrilling thought, a ghost in the machine of time itself. While our previous mysteries involved cursed diamonds and phantom ships, one of history's most powerful and destructive legends was born from a shimmering, golden misunderstanding. This is the story of El Dorado, the Golden One, a myth that began not as a place but as a person, and how that single figure ignited a centuries-long frenzy of exploration, conquest, and tragedy. Our journey takes us to the highlands of modern-day Colombia, to the sacred Lake Guatavita, where the Muisca people practiced a breathtaking ritual for their new leader. When a new Zipa, or chief, was to ascend to power, the ceremony was one of profound spiritual significance. The future ruler would be taken to the center of the circular lake on a raft, accompanied by priests and adorned not with solid gold ornaments, but with his entire body coated in a fine, clinging dust of gold. He was, for that moment, a living, breathing man of gold, the literal El Dorado. As the raft reached the center, amidst chanting and the smoke of burning incense, a vast offering would be made to the gods. The chief would wash the gold dust from his body into the lake's waters, and his attendants would throw a trove of magnificent golden artifacts, figurines, jewelry, and emeralds into the depths as a sacrifice. This was not a display of material wealth for its own sake, but a sacred act of balance and reciprocity with the divine, a way for a new leader to secure prosperity for his people. It was this powerful and mesmerizing image, whispered from tribe to tribe and eventually distorted through translation and wishful thinking by Spanish conquistadors, that took on a life of its own. The Spaniards, fresh from plundering the immense treasures of the Aztec and Inca empires, were primed to believe in even greater riches. They heard the tale of the Gilded Man, and missing its spiritual core, fixated entirely on the gold. They began to ask where this golden chief came from. Surely, they reasoned, he must be the king of a city made of gold, and so the person transformed into a place. The legend of El Dorado shifted from a single ritual to a quest for a mythical city of unimaginable wealth, hidden somewhere in the uncharted, impenetrable interior of South America. This golden mirage began to drift, its location always just beyond the next mountain range or deep within the next unexplored jungle, pulling adventurers deeper into a continent that would prove to be as deadly as it was vast. One of the most grueling and disastrous expeditions was led by Gonzalo Pizarro, the brother of the famed conqueror of the Inca, Francisco Pizarro. In 1541, lured by tales of a land rich with cinnamon and gold, Pizarro set out from Quito with a massive force of over 200 Spanish soldiers and thousands of indigenous porters and slaves. The expedition quickly became a nightmare. The lush green hell of the Amazon rainforest was nothing like the highland empires they had previously conquered. They found no cities, no roads, and no gold. Their supplies vanished, and the relentless rain, disease, and hostile attacks decimated their numbers. In a desperate gamble, Pizarro sent a smaller party, led by Francisco de Orellana, ahead on a raft to search for food. Orellana and his men were swept down river by the powerful current and, unable to fight their way back upstream, became the first Europeans to navigate the entire length of the Amazon River. While this was a monumental feat of exploration, it was born from failure. Pizarro, abandoned and defeated, eventually staggered back to Quito with fewer than 100 ragged, starving survivors, the dream of El Dorado having consumed his entire expedition. The legend was not confined to the Spanish. Decades later, it captivated the English courtier and adventurer Sir Walter Raleigh. He became obsessed with the idea of finding El Dorado, which he called Manoa, and believed it was located in the highlands of Guyana, a territory he hoped to claim for England to rival Spanish power in the New World. His first expedition in 1595 penetrated the Orinoco River basin, and though he found no city of gold, he returned with vivid and largely fabricated accounts of a rich empire, which he published in his book, The Discovery of Guyana. This work popularized the myth throughout Europe, stoking the fires of colonial ambition. Decades later, in his 60s, Raleigh was released from the Tower of London, where he had been imprisoned for treason, on the condition he lead a second expedition to find El Dorado without provoking war with Spain. The mission was another catastrophic failure. His men attacked a Spanish outpost against his orders, leading to the death of his son, and he found nothing. Upon his empty-handed return to England, the king, eager to appease Spain, had the aged adventurer beheaded, finally ending his lifelong and fatal pursuit of a golden phantom. Over the centuries, the myth continued to evolve and expand, its scale growing with each failure. El Dorado was no longer just a city. It was imagined as an entire empire, a civilization of such wealth that its streets were paved with gold and its temples inlaid with jewels. This ever-receding mirage served a dual purpose. For the European monarchs and adventurers, it was a powerful justification for the enormous expense and human cost of exploration and colonization. For the indigenous peoples of the Americas, however, the myth was a plague. The relentless search for El Dorado drove the Spanish and Portuguese deeper into the continent, leading to the enslavement, displacement, and annihilation of countless tribes who either could not lead their tormentors to the non-existent gold or who deliberately misdirected them to protect their own homes. The legend became a tool of genocide, its promise of riches used to excuse untold brutality. In a profound twist of irony, the true treasure of the Muisca was eventually found, but not in the form the conquistadors had imagined. In modern times, the stunning artistry of the Muisca people has been revealed through artifacts like the famous Muisca raft, a golden representation of the very El Dorado ceremony itself. This exquisite piece, discovered in a cave near Lake Guatavita, depicts the chief standing on his raft surrounded by priests, a beautiful and literal golden snapshot of the ritual that started it all. This artifact and others like it are now priceless cultural treasures, far more valuable historically than their weight in raw gold. The legend of El Dorado endures not as a map to a lost city, but as a powerful cautionary tale about the destructive power of greed and the tragic consequences of cultural misunderstanding. It reminds us that the most valuable treasures are often not material, but the stories, traditions, and artistry of the cultures we are so often quick to destroy in our rush for riches we never truly find. If the tales of cursed treasure and phantom fleets have taught us anything, it is that the sea guards its secrets with a cold and possessive grip, but perhaps no maritime mystery better embodies this than the haunting case of the Mary Celeste. On December 4, 1872, the British brig Dei Gratia was cutting through the calm Atlantic waters off the coast of Portugal when her crew spotted another ship sailing erratically, yawing in the wind with its sails partially set. As they drew closer, they recognized the vessel as the Mary Celeste, an American merchant brigantine that had left New York for Genoa a month before them. Sensing something was deeply wrong, Captain David Morehouse sent a boarding party across. What they found aboard the Mary Celeste was not a scene of violence or chaos, but something far more unsettling, a perfect, profound, and inexplicable silence. The ship was completely seaworthy, its hull sound and its cargo of industrial alcohol still securely stored in its barrels, yet every single soul who had been on board was gone. The 10 people, Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife and 2-year-old daughter, and a crew of 7 experienced sailors, had vanished without a trace. The details discovered on board only deepened the eerie chill of the abandonment. In the captain's cabin, the logbook lay open on his desk with the last entry dated 10 days prior, placing the ship a mere 6 miles from the position where it was found. A meal, perhaps breakfast, was left uneaten on the table, as if the occupants had been interrupted mid-bite. The crew's personal belongings, including precious items like watches and tobacco pipes, were still in their quarters, and even the captain's sword and navigational instruments remained untouched. Crucially, the ship's single lifeboat was missing, suggesting a deliberate, if frantic, decision to abandon a perfectly sound vessel. A frayed rope was found trailing in the water from the ship's stern, its end cleanly cut. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of foul play, and no clue as to what could have provoked such a desperate act. It was as if the entire company had simply been plucked from the deck and spirited away, leaving behind a ship that was not a wreck but a floating, drifting tomb. The subsequent investigation and the countless theories that have emerged over the last century and a half have only thickened the fog of mystery. The initial court of inquiry in Gibraltar could find no definitive answer, though it awarded the salvage crew a much reduced sum, hinting at official suspicion that something untoward had occurred. This legal ambiguity opened the floodgates for speculation. Early sensational theories spun tales of pirate attacks, but this was quickly dismissed. Nothing of value was stolen, and there was no evidence of violence. A more popular theory pointed to the cargo itself, over 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol. Perhaps fumes from leaking barrels had built up in the hold, leading the captain to fear a catastrophic explosion. In a moment of panic, the theory goes, he might have ordered everyone into the lifeboat, tethered to the ship with that single rope, waiting for the danger to pass. Then a sudden gust of wind could have filled the Mary Celeste's sails, snapping the tether and leaving the lifeboat adrift in the open ocean to face its grim fate. This remains one of the most plausible scientific explanations, yet it fails to fully satisfy. Would an experienced captain like Briggs have abandoned his sturdy ship for a tiny lifeboat based on a fear that never materialized, especially since the cargo was largely intact and the hatches to the hold were found securely fastened? Other theories have ventured into even stranger territory. Some have proposed the possibility of a sudden, powerful waterspout or a seaquake, an underwater seismic event, that might have terrified the crew into believing the ship was sinking, even if it sustained no critical damage. Another fascinating hypothesis involves a rare geological phenomenon. The Mary Celeste was found near the Azores, a volcanically active region. Could the crew have been overcome by toxic fumes, perhaps carbon dioxide, released from a submarine vent? This might explain a rapid, silent evacuation, but it doesn't quite account for the orderly removal of the lifeboat. Then there are the more outlandish ideas fueled by a famous and largely fictional short story by Arthur Conan Doyle written years after the event. His tale, which featured a vengeful ex-slave and murder, helped cement the myth of the Mary Celeste as a ghost ship in the public imagination, blending fiction so thoroughly with fact that the two became nearly inseparable. More modern fringe theories have even suggested an attack by a giant squid or, inevitably, alien abduction. What truly cements the Mary Celeste as the archetypal ghost ship is not the presence of a supernatural event, but the utter absence of any logical conclusion. Every proposed explanation contains a fatal flaw, a detail from the scene that refuses to fit neatly into the puzzle. It is a story defined by its negative space: no bodies, no struggle, no clear motive, and no closure. This vacuum of fact has allowed the legend to grow and evolve, becoming a blank canvas onto which we project our deepest fears of the ocean's vast and indifferent power. The Mary Celeste represents the ultimate what if, a perfectly preserved moment of crisis frozen in time, a riddle without an answer that continues to sail on through our collective imagination, forever abandoned, forever searching for a port it will never find. Leaving behind the silent mystery of the Mary Celeste, we journey inland to the rugged, isolated province of Gévaudan in 18th century France, where a different kind of terror took hold, one with claws, teeth, and a seemingly insatiable appetite for human flesh. Beginning in the summer of 1764, the countryside was gripped by a wave of attacks so brutal and persistent that they would become etched into the national consciousness. The beast's first confirmed victim was a young shepherdess named Jean Boulet, and her death was merely the opening note in a symphony of horror that would last for 3 long years. What made these attacks so chilling was not just their frequency, but the nature of the predator. This was no ordinary wolf. Witnesses described a creature of monstrous proportions, the size of a calf or a young cow, with a massive head, a broad chest, and a reddish-brown coat marked with dark stripes along its back. Its tail was unusually long and powerful, and its jaws were said to be capable of taking a human head clean off the shoulders. It displayed a terrifying intelligence, often bypassing livestock entirely to target people, primarily women and children tending flocks in remote fields, and its methods were exceptionally cruel, often playing with its prey rather than killing it outright. The sheer scale of the carnage is almost incomprehensible. Official records from the time document over 200 attacks, with at least 100 resulting in death, though local accounts suggest the true number of victims may have been much higher, possibly even exceeding 300. The beast seemed to operate with near impunity, striking in daylight, evading traps, and even surviving direct volleys of gunfire from those who fought back. As the body count rose, so did the panic, which quickly spread from the rural villages all the way to the court of King Louis XV in Versailles. The populace was convinced this was no natural animal. In an age where superstition still held powerful sway, many believed it was a loup-garou, a werewolf, perhaps a man cursed to transform into a beast. Others, hearing descriptions of its strange appearance, speculated it was an exotic animal like a hyena or a lion that had been unleashed from a traveling menagerie. The fear was so palpable that the very social fabric of Gévaudan began to fray. People refused to work in the fields alone. Church bells were rung to warn of the beast's approach, and the local economy suffered as terror kept everyone confined to their homes. The king, who was initially skeptical, could no longer ignore the crisis. He dispatched professional huntsmen and 2 detachments of dragoons, his own elite soldiers, to the region, offering a small fortune in reward money. the equivalent of a lifetime's earnings for a peasant for the beast's head. These massive, state-sponsored hunts involved thousands of participants beating the forests and mountains, yet they repeatedly failed. The creature appeared to vanish into the landscape, only to reappear miles away to claim another victim, taunting its human pursuers. The failure of the royal hunts only amplified the legend, making the beast seem like a demonic force that could not be slain by conventional means. The break finally came in September of 1765, when a local hunter named Jean Chastel, a figure who would himself become part of the legend, reportedly shot a massive wolf using a silver bullet, a detail often emphasized in folklore. The animal, known as the Wolf of Chases, was enormous, weighing nearly 130 pounds. It was stuffed and transported to Versailles as proof of the beast's demise, and for a short while the attack ceased, allowing the province to breathe a collective sigh of relief. However, the story does not end with a single shot. While the official narrative declared the beast dead, a number of attacks continued to be reported in the following months, leading many to believe that either the true beast was still out there or that the problem was far more complex than a single animal. This lingering mystery has fueled a century's worth of modern analysis and theories. One of the most plausible explanations is that Gévaudan was terrorized by a pack of large wolves, or perhaps one or two particularly large and aggressive individual wolves, possibly hybrids between wolves and large feral dogs. The region was experiencing a surge in the wolf population, and a pack led by an atypically bold alpha could account for the high number of attacks and the creature's apparent intelligence and resilience. Another compelling theory suggests the beast was actually a surviving member of a prehistoric species, such as a mesonychid, a large wolf-like predator known from fossils, though most scientists find the survival of such a creature into the modern era highly improbable. A much darker and more human-centered theory posits that the beast of Gévaudan was not an animal at all, but a cover for a human serial killer. This idea suggests that a psychopathic individual, possibly with knowledge of the wilderness, used a trained or feral animal to commit murders, or even dressed in animal pelts to mimic the attacks, explaining the beast's reported resistance to bullets and its selective targeting. Some have even pointed a finger at Jean Chastel himself, the man who supposedly killed the beast, proposing that he trained the animal and was responsible for the attacks, only killing it to claim the reward and end the investigation when the authorities were getting too close. While this theory is gripping, it is largely circumstantial and fails to account for the overwhelming number of eyewitness descriptions that consistently point to a large, non-human predator. Ultimately, the legend of the beast of Gévaudan endures because it represents a perfect storm of historical circumstance. It occurred in a remote, superstitious region at a time when the natural world was still deeply frightening and poorly understood. The massive, failed response from the highest levels of government highlighted the limitations of human power against the raw force of nature, or perhaps the depths of human evil. The story has been immortalized in numerous books, films, and even a popular Japanese manga series, cementing its status as one of history's great monster tales. It serves as a chilling reminder of a time when the wilderness at the edge of civilization was a place of genuine, tangible monsters, and the line between a natural predator and a supernatural fiend was dangerously thin. But if the beast of Gévaudan was a monster of flesh and blood, our next mystery presents a terror of an entirely different nature, one that hijacked the human body itself in one of the most bizarre and tragic epidemics ever recorded. In the sweltering summer of 1518, the city of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, became the stage for a phenomenon that defies belief. It began, seemingly innocently enough, when a woman named Frau Trophia stepped into the street and began to dance. This was not a dance of joy or celebration, but a frantic, compulsive, and uncontrollable jig. She danced alone for hours, her movements ceaseless and frenzied, until she collapsed from exhaustion. after a brief period of rest, she rose and began again, dancing for days on end. Within a week, her solitary performance had become a city-wide nightmare. Dozens of others had joined her, their bodies seized by the same irresistible urge to move. Within a month, the dancing crowd had swelled to over 400 people, all trapped in a macabre, unstoppable ballet. The scene must have been one of utter surreal horror. The streets were filled with people writhing and leaping, their faces often contorted in pain and fear, their feet bleeding through their shoes, their bodies pushed far beyond the limits of human endurance. They did not stop to eat or sleep. They danced until they dropped from sheer exhaustion, from broken bones, from heart attacks and strokes. Historical records from the time grimly note that the death toll reached as high as 15 people per day, their bodies giving out under the relentless, involuntary exertion. The city council, utterly baffled and desperate for a solution, initially did the very thing that would seem to make the problem worse. Following the advice of physicians of the era, they decided that the dancers simply needed to dance the fit out of their system. They cleared public spaces, built a large wooden stage in the horse market, and even hired musicians and professional dancers to keep the afflicted moving, believing that this would break the fever and restore order. Instead, this official sanction only provided more fuel for the hysteria, encouraging more people to join the frantic throes and accelerating the spread of the physical and psychological contagion. To understand why this happened, we have to look at the world these people inhabited. Strasbourg in 1518 was a city on the brink. The preceding years had been a cascade of misery. Harvests had failed repeatedly, leading to severe famine and skyrocketing food prices. The population was already weakened and malnourished. On top of this, smallpox and syphilis were raging through the region, and the social fabric was frayed by extreme poverty and political uncertainty. The people were living in a state of constant high-anxiety stress, a powder keg of collective trauma just waiting for a spark. In such an environment where scientific understanding was limited and religious explanation dominated, the dancing plague was interpreted through a supernatural lens. Many believed the dancers were victims of a curse, perhaps a divine punishment for their sins, or worse, that they had been possessed by a demonic spirit, specifically Saint Vitus, who was ironically the patron saint of dancers and actors, but was also believed to inflict a dancing curse upon those who angered him. Modern science offers several compelling theories to explain this historical nightmare. The most widely accepted explanation is a psychological phenomenon known as mass psychogenic illness, sometimes called mass hysteria. This occurs when psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms in a group of people, often in a context of extreme social or economic pressure. In a superstitious society with no concept of psychology, the sight of one person dancing uncontrollably could have provided a tangible, physical outlet for the pent-up anxieties of the entire community. It created a shared, permissible if terrifying, form of expression for their collective suffering. The dancing became a contagious performance of despair, a somatic cry for help from a populace that had no other way to articulate its profound distress. A second and equally fascinating theory points to a biological culprit, ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye, the staple grain of the region at the time. This fungus contains alkaloids that are closely related to lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. When ingested in bread made from contaminated rye, ergot can cause a terrifying array of symptoms, including muscle spasms, convulsions, hallucinations, and a burning sensation in the limbs known in the Middle Ages as St. Anthony's fire. It is entirely plausible that a poor harvest led to the use of moldy rye, and that a segment of the population, already weakened by famine, consumed enough of the toxin to trigger violent, involuntary muscle contractions that could be interpreted as a frantic dance. However, this theory has its limitations. While ergotism can cause spasms and convulsions, it typically leads to gangrene and loss of limbs, not the coordinated, days-long dancing described in the chronicles. Furthermore, it wouldn't easily explain the highly social and imitative nature of the outbreak. Perhaps the most complete explanation lies in a combination of these factors. A small number of people, possibly suffering from ergot poisoning or a different neurological condition, may have begun the dancing. In a city gripped by fear, superstition, and mass stress, their bizarre behavior then acted as a catalyst for a massive psychogenic event. The desperate, shared belief in a dancing curse, combined with the authorities' disastrous decision to encourage the behavior, created a perfect feedback loop that swept up hundreds of vulnerable individuals. The dancing plague of 1518 stands as a stark and haunting monument to the power of the human mind and the profound ways our bodies can manifest the traumas of our environment. It represents a terrifying intersection of medicine, psychology, and superstition, a moment when the lines between physical illness, mental distress, and perceived divine punishment blurred into a single, tragic, and unstoppable dance of death. From the collective frenzy of a dancing plague, we turn now to a mystery of profound and solitary silence, a book that has stubbornly kept its secrets for over 500 years. Imagine a volume bound in vellum, its pages filled with a script that resembles no known alphabet, flowing in a confident hand from right to left, yet conveying absolutely no meaning to anyone who has ever tried to read it. This is the Voynich Manuscript, often called the world's most unreadable book, a codex that has become the ultimate puzzle for cryptographers, linguists, and historians, defying every attempt at interpretation since it re-emerged into the modern world. Its pages are a gallery of the bizarre, teeming with illustrations of plants that have no counterpart in nature, intricate astrological diagrams featuring unfamiliar constellations, and perhaps most curiously, numerous pages depicting what appear to be tiny, nude female figures bathing in or connecting to a complex network of elaborate green tubes and vessels, a section often referred to as biological or balneological. This singular artifact is a locked room mystery in book form, and the key has been lost to time. The manuscript's known history begins somewhat murkily in the early 17th century. We know it was once in the possession of the eccentric Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, a man renowned for his fascination with the occult and the exotic, who reportedly purchased it for 600 gold ducats, an enormous sum that suggests its seller, likely the English astrologer and magician John Dee or his associate Edward Kelly, convinced the emperor it was the work of the legendary Franciscan friar Roger Bacon. For a time, the book was held in the library of a fellow alchemist, and then it seemingly vanished from the historical record for centuries. It resurfaced dramatically in 1912 when a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich found it in a chest at the Villa Mondragon, a Jesuit college in Italy. He purchased it along with a cache of other manuscripts, and from that moment, the book that would bear his name embarked on its modern career of frustrating every expert who encountered it. After Voynich's death, the manuscript passed through several hands before being donated to Yale University's Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library in 1969, where it resides today as one of their most famous and frequently studied holdings, accessible to all online yet comprehensible to none. The central, maddening enigma of the Voynich manuscript is, of course, its text. The writing system consists of somewhere between 20 and 30 distinct letters, with a structure that appears to follow phonological and syntactic rules, giving it the statistical profile of a genuine, natural language. Certain characters appear only at the beginnings of words, others only at the ends, and the word length and repetition patterns are consistent with texts like the Bible or scientific treatises. This tantalizing structure has been a siren call to the world's greatest codebreakers. Teams of American and British cryptanalysts from both world wars, including luminaries who had cracked Japanese and German ciphers, turned their formidable skills to the Voynich after 1945, and all failed utterly. Even modern supercomputers armed with sophisticated algorithms have been unable to find a pattern that leads to a coherent translation. The text resists every known method of decryption, from simple substitution ciphers to complex polyalphabetic codes, leading many to conclude it is either an unbelievably sophisticated cipher for which the key is lost or something far stranger. This profound resistance to decipherment has spawned a wild spectrum of theories about its origin and purpose. The most skeptical view is that the entire manuscript is an elaborate and brilliant hoax. Proponents of this theory, such as historian and manuscript expert Gordon Rugg, suggest it could have been created in the 16th century using a clever device like a Cardan grill to generate meaningless but linguistically plausible text, all in order to dupe a wealthy patron like Emperor Rudolph into paying a fortune for a worthless fake. While this explains the lack of meaning, it struggles to account for the incredible consistency and complexity of the script across more than 240 pages, a monumental effort for a mere forgery. On the other end of the spectrum are theories that the manuscript represents a record of a lost language, perhaps a proto-Romance tongue or a constructed script for a now-forgotten dialect. Some researchers have even proposed it is a form of visual cryptography, where the writing itself is secondary to the illustrations, and the real information is encoded in the number of petals on a plant or the arrangement of stars in a diagram. Then there are the more speculative ideas that push the boundaries of historical possibility. Could it be the sole surviving medical and botanical text of a pre-Columbian Central American civilization, recording knowledge unknown to European science? This might explain the unidentifiable plants and the unique artistic style. And inevitably, some have looked at the otherworldly illustrations and the impenetrable text and wondered if its origins are not of this earth, suggesting it is an alien artifact left behind for humanity. While this is the least evidence-based theory, its very existence speaks to the manuscript's profound power to baffle and inspire. In recent years, some researchers have claimed small breakthroughs, suggesting the text might be a form of abbreviated Latin or an encoded Hebrew, but these claims have not withstood broader scholarly scrutiny and have failed to produce a full, verifiable translation. Each new solution ultimately crumbles under the weight of the manuscript's overarching incoherence. What truly ensures the Voynich Manuscript's enduring allure is not the hope that it will one day be solved, but the opposite, its magnificent, permanent mystery. It sits in its library as a tangible reminder that there are still artifacts from our past that refuse to be neatly categorized and explained by modern science and scholarship. It represents the ultimate what if. What if it contains the lost herbal secrets of a forgotten culture, or the astronomical observations of a lone, brilliant mind operating outside all known intellectual traditions? The book's silence is more powerful than any answer it could possibly contain, because as long as it remains unread, it fuels our imagination and our innate desire for puzzles that defy our understanding. It is a ghost of knowledge, a beautiful, intricate, and utterly silent testament to the limits of what we can know about history. Plunging from the silent mystery of a book to the thunderous collapse of an entire civilization, we arrive at what might be the grandest and most influential legend of them all, the lost city of Atlantis. This story of a magnificent, technologically advanced empire that was swallowed by the sea in a single, catastrophic day and night has captivated dreamers, scientists, and adventurers for more than 2,000 years. Its origins, unlike many ancient myths, can be traced back to a single, brilliant source, the Greek philosopher Plato, in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE. Plato provides our only original account of this fabled land, not as a simple tale, but as a foundational story told to his ancestor, the Athenian statesman Solon, by Egyptian priests. These priests described Atlantis as a powerful naval empire that existed 9,000 years before Solon's time, situated beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a utopian society, rich in natural resources like precious metals and a mysterious material called orichalcum, and populated by a noble, semi-divine race. Plato's narrative is incredibly detailed, painting a picture of a circular capital city with concentric rings of water and land, connected by great canals and bridges. At its heart stood a magnificent temple to the god Poseidon, the supposed ancestor of the Atlantean kings. For generations, the people of Atlantis were virtuous and wise, living in harmony with their gods and their laws. But as their power grew, so did their hubris. Plato writes that their divine nature became diluted with mortal weakness, and they became corrupt, greedy, and arrogant. They embarked on a campaign of conquest, seeking to subjugate the entire Mediterranean world. It was only the city-state of Athens, in its ancient, idealized form, that stood against them and defeated the Atlantean forces. And then, as punishment for their moral decay, the gods unleashed a terrible cataclysm. In one violent day and night of earthquakes and floods, the entire island of Atlantis was shattered and sank beneath the waves, vanishing forever into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. For Plato, this was not a history lesson but a moral and political allegory, a cautionary tale about the dangers of imperial ambition and the collapse that inevitably follows when a society abandons justice and virtue. The enduring power of Atlantis, however, lies in the fact that we have never been able to leave it as a mere parable. The sheer specificity of Plato's description has sent generations of scholars and amateur sleuths on a global treasure hunt, scouring the earth for any geographical feature that might match the clues. One of the most scientifically compelling candidates is the volcanic island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea. Around 1600 B.C.E., this island, then known as Thera, was home to the sophisticated Minoan civilization. Thera was utterly devastated by one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history, an event so powerful it created the massive caldera that defines Santorini's landscape today. The eruption would have generated colossal tsunamis that would have ravaged the nearby island of Crete, leading to the rapid decline of the Minoan Empire. Could the memory of this real, catastrophic event, the destruction of an advanced seafaring culture in a single, terrible day, have been distorted and passed down over centuries, eventually reaching Plato's ears and inspiring his story of a sunken continent? It's a tantalizing theory, though it places Atlantis in the wrong ocean, far from the Pillars of Hercules described by Plato. Undeterred by geographical discrepancies, other theorists have looked to the Atlantic Ocean itself, just as Plato's text suggests. The Azores Archipelago, a group of volcanic islands perched on the mid-Atlantic ridge, has long been a favorite candidate. Some speculate that these islands are merely the mountain peaks of the much larger, submerged Atlantean continent. Similarly, the region around the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a curious underwater formation of seemingly arranged limestone blocks, has been proposed as a possible remnant of Atlantean roads or walls, though most geologists identify it as a perfectly natural formation of beach-rock. A more recent and visually stunning hypothesis points not to the ocean but to the desert. The Richat structure in Mauritania, also known as the Eye of the Sahara, is a massive, bullseye-shaped geological dome that, when viewed from above, bears a striking resemblance to Plato's description of Atlantis's concentric rings. Proponents of this theory argue that shifts in the Earth's climate over millennia could have turned a once fertile plain into the Sahara Desert, and that the sea mentioned by Plato was actually a misinterpretation of a vast inland sea that has long since evaporated. While geologists confirm the Richat structure is a natural, eroded dome and not a sunken city, its visual appeal keeps it at the forefront of modern Atlantean speculation. Beyond the search for a physical location, the legend of Atlantis has taken on a life of its own, evolving into a powerful cultural and pseudoscientific icon. In the late 19th century, figures like Ignatius Donnelly reinvigorated the myth with his book Atlantis. The Antediluvian World, in which he argued that Atlantis was not just a real place, but the mother culture of all ancient civilizations, suggesting that its survivors spread across the globe, bringing their knowledge to Egypt, Mexico, and Peru. This idea of Atlantis as a hyper-advanced society, possessing technology or spiritual wisdom lost to the modern world, was further popularized by the psychic Edgar Cayce in the 1920s and 30s. Cayce gave readings in which he described Atlanteans using powerful energy crystals for power and healing, and he even predicted that the lost city would rise again near Bimini in 1968 or 69, a prophecy that fueled yet another wave of exploration. This vision of a sophisticated, utopian Atlantis has become a staple of fantasy literature, comic books, and films, from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to the animated movie Atlantis, The Lost Empire. The name itself has become shorthand for any glorious, vanished past, a symbol of both human potential and the fragility of our creations. So, where does this leave us in our search for the truth? The academic consensus remains firm. Plato's Atlantis is a literary creation, a philosophical myth designed to illustrate his ideas about the ideal state and the consequences of its corruption. No credible archaeological evidence has ever been found on the ocean floor or elsewhere to prove the existence of a continent-sized civilization that sank in the Atlantic. Yet the legend persists with a stubborn vitality that few other stories can claim. This is likely because Atlantis speaks to something fundamental in the human experience. It taps into our deep-seated fear of catastrophic natural disasters and our awe of the ocean's immense unknown power. It embodies our nostalgia for a perceived golden age, a time when humans were supposedly wiser and more connected to the world. And it serves as an eternal warning, reminding us that no matter how grand our cities or how advanced our technology, hubris can still be our undoing. Atlantis is more than a place on a map. It is a ghost continent in our collective imagination, a sunken kingdom of dreams and cautionary tales that continues to shimmer just beneath the waves of history. But if the legend of Atlantis represents a mystery on a grand, ancient scale, our next enigma brings us firmly into the modern world, demonstrating that the unexplained is not confined to history books but can be a persistent, low-frequency nuisance in the here and now. Imagine trying to fall asleep in the dead of night, only to be kept awake by a faint, droning sound, like a distant diesel engine idling forever, a noise that seems to vibrate not just in your ears but deep within your bones. This is the reality for a small but deeply affected group of people in various locations around the globe, and nowhere is this phenomenon more famous than in the high desert of New Mexico. The Tao's hum is a modern auditory ghost, a low-frequency sound reportedly heard by about 2% of the local population in and around the town of Taos since the early 1990s. Those who can perceive it, often called hearers, describe it as a maddeningly persistent rumble, a faint but unwavering hum that is typically more noticeable indoors, especially at night when ambient noise from the world outside dies down, leaving them alone with this relentless internal vibration. The profound challenge of the Tao's hum and similar acoustic phenomena reported in places like Bristol, England, and Largs, Scotland, is its deeply subjective nature. Not everyone can hear it, and for those who can, its characteristics are frustratingly difficult to pin down. Descriptions vary, but common themes emerge: a sound resembling distant machinery, a low buzz, or a deep pulsing that seems to permeate the very walls of a home. What makes it so baffling is that standard microphones and audio equipment consistently fail to pick it up. This has led to a stark division between those who experience the hum as a genuine, external sound and the scientific community, which often struggles to find any physical evidence to corroborate their claims. For the hearers, this dismissal can be as frustrating as the hum itself, making them feel isolated and disbelieved, as if they are the victims of a collective hallucination or a private auditory torture. Driven by numerous complaints, official investigations were launched in the 1990s. Congress even got involved, tasking a team of scientists from some of the nation's top research institutions to travel to Taos and get to the bottom of the mystery. The researchers arrived with an array of sensitive acoustic equipment, aiming to triangulate the source of the sound once and for all. They monitored the town for electromagnetic anomalies, checked for seismic vibrations, and scrutinized every potential man-made source. They investigated local power lines, industrial facilities, and military operations from nearby bases. Yet, after an exhaustive study, the team concluded they could not identify a definitive source for the hum. They ruled out obvious culprits like factory equipment, generators, or secret military experiments, leaving the mystery completely unsolved. Their final report could only confirm that a certain percentage of the population genuinely heard something, while simultaneously admitting that science could not determine what that something was. This official dead end has left the field wide open for a fascinating range of theories. One of the most prominent explanations points inward toward human biology itself. Some audiologists propose that the hum is not an external sound at all, but a form of low-frequency tinnitus, a perception of sound with no external cause. In this case, it would not be a hum in the air, but a hum generated by the auditory system. This could explain why sensitive microphones don't pick it up and why only a subset of the population is affected. Perhaps these individuals have a unique sensitivity to very low-frequency sounds, or maybe their brains are spontaneously generating this signal as a result of minor damage or a quirk in their neural wiring. Another biological theory suggests the hum could be the result of the body amplifying its own internal sounds, such as blood flowing through vessels or the resonant frequency of the skull itself, which some people become acutely aware of in moments of absolute quiet. Other theories look to the environment for answers. The Earth itself is far from silent. It constantly generates low-frequency noise from oceanic waves, atmospheric pressure changes, and even seismic activity deep below the crust. It's possible that the Taos hum is a natural, albeit extremely rare, geological phenomenon. Certain underground rock formations could be acting as a natural resonator, amplifying these ever-present planetary vibrations to a level that only the most sensitive ears can detect. The specific geology of the Taos area, situated in the Rio Grande Rift, might create the perfect conditions for such an effect. Alternatively, the source could be anthropogenic but diffuse and difficult to trace. Some researchers have speculated about a phenomenon called acoustic radiation from high-pressure gas pipelines that crisscross the continent, or the cumulative, far-field infrasound generated by the vast industrial infrastructure of modern civilization, a constant global drone that only becomes perceptible in the quietest of locations. Regardless of its origin, the psychological and social impact on the hearers is very real and often severe. For them, the hum is not a curiosity, it is a source of genuine distress. The incessant, inescapable nature of the noise can lead to chronic sleep deprivation, intense anxiety, migraines, and a feeling of helplessness. When your own home, the place meant for rest, becomes a source of perpetual irritation, it can be profoundly destabilizing. The fact that loved ones and neighbors often cannot hear the sound only compounds the problem, leading to strained relationships and feelings of alienation. Some hearers become so desperate for relief that they resort to drastic measures, installing elaborate sound masking systems or even moving away entirely, only to sometimes discover that the hum has followed them to their new location, a phantom that refuses to be left behind. The Taos hum, therefore, is more than just an auditory puzzle. It is a powerful case study in the intersection of perception, environment, and human suffering, a reminder that a mystery does not need to be ancient or epic to have a profound and life-altering effect on those who encounter it. Yet, even as the phantom hum of Taos demonstrates how a modern mystery can torment the living, history offers far more visceral and brutal enigmas, none more infamous than the haunting and gruesome death of a young woman whose story was twisted into legend by the very forces that sought to explain it. On a quiet morning in January 1947, a mother taking her child for a walk in a Los Angeles neighborhood stumbled upon a scene of such calculated horror it would forever scar the American consciousness. There, on a vacant lot on Norton Avenue, lay the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, posed with a terrifying theatrical precision. She had been cleanly severed at the waist, her body completely drained of blood and meticulously washed. Her face was slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears in a ghastly, permanent grin known as a Glasgow smile. The killer had taken obscene care with the presentation, arranging her limbs at specific angles and placing her intestines neatly tucked beneath her buttocks. The sheer amount of violence, combined with the clinical cleanliness of the scene, suggested a killer with surgical knowledge, someone who wielded a knife with both rage and a chilling expertise. The investigation was immediately overwhelmed, not just by the brutality of the crime, but by a storm of media sensationalism that would forever change how such cases were reported. It was the press, hungering for a catchy moniker, who dubbed Elizabeth Short the Black Dahlia. The name was a macabre fusion of the popular film The Blue Dahlia and rumors of Short's preference for black clothing. This invented persona quickly eclipsed the real woman, transforming a complex, troubled individual into a two-dimensional icon of noir tragedy. Newspapers painted her as a Hollywood aspirant, a femme fatale who courted danger, a narrative that was far more sensational than the truth of an unemployed New Englander drifting through life, often dependent on the kindness of strangers and the men she dated. The media frenzy created a circus-like atmosphere around the case, with the Los Angeles Police Department receiving hundreds of false confessions and thousands of tips, many from people captivated more by the myth than the murder. This flood of misinformation, fueled by the Black Dahlia persona, hopelessly muddied the investigative waters from the very beginning, ensuring the truth would be buried under an avalanche of pulp fiction. The killer seemed to taunt the authorities, adding another layer of cryptic menace to the proceedings. Shortly after the murder, the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper received a package containing Short's birth certificate, social security card, and an address book, along with a letter composed of words and letters cut from a magazine. The sender signed it with a chilling, self-bestowed title, The Black Dahlia Avenger. This was followed by a phone call to the newspaper with a man claiming credit and promising to turn himself in, a promise that was, of course, never kept. Whether this was the genuine killer or another grotesque hoaxer seeking a taste of the spotlight remains unknown, but it propelled the case into a new stratum of public obsession. The address book led police on a wild goose chase, contacting every name within it, including dozens of men who had only a passing acquaintance with Short, further scattering the focus of the investigation and highlighting the near-impossible task of sifting real leads from the fictional narrative consuming the city. With no clear physical evidence tying anyone to the crime, the suspect list ballooned to include a bewildering array of possibilities, each more bizarre than the last. The surgical precision of the dismemberment naturally led investigators to consider doctors. One prime suspect was Dr. George Hodel, a prominent physician with a sophisticated, decadent lifestyle and a known history of violence toward women. Years after the fact, his own son, a former LAPD detective, would publicly accuse him, pointing to secret recordings where George Hodel made cryptic, arrogant statements that could be interpreted as confessions. Another suspect was a slick-talking salesman named Robert Manley, the last person known to have seen Short alive. He was intensely interrogated and even subjected to a lie detector test, but he was eventually cleared. The parade of potential killers stretched into the dozens, including a mortician who might have had the skills for such a clean dissection, and even a troubled man who walked into a police station and calmly announced that his mother was the Black Dahlia killer, a claim that was swiftly and thoroughly debunked. Perhaps the most compelling and expansive theory connected the murder to a different series of crimes entirely: the Cleveland torso murderer, also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Between 1934 and 1938, a string of at least 12 victims were found dismembered around Cleveland, Ohio, their bodies often beheaded and drained of blood in a manner that bore a stark resemblance to the treatment of Elizabeth Short. The lead investigator on those cases was the legendary lawman Elliot Ness, who had his own prime suspect, a doctor named Francis Sweeney. The possibility that a transient, itinerant killer with medical training could have traveled from the industrial Midwest to the sun-drenched coast of California, resuming his grisly work a decade later, is a haunting one. While no concrete evidence ever definitively linked the two cases, the similarities in methodology are undeniable, suggesting either a single, mobile predator or a horrifyingly specific modus operandi that was copied by another individual. This theory expands the shadow of the Black Dahlia murder, casting it not as a singular, isolated atrocity, but as a potential chapter in a much longer, more sprawling nightmare. In the decades since, the Black Dahlia case has become a foundational pillar of American true crime, a dark well from which countless books, films, and documentaries continue to draw. Its enduring power lies in a perfect storm of factors: the sheer, shocking brutality of the crime, the tragic, malleable identity of the victim, the media's creation of a timeless myth, and the utter absence of a resolution. Elizabeth Short's story is a permanent open wound, a reminder of a justice that was never served. It embodies the darkest side of the Hollywood dream, where ambition and vulnerability can lead to a fate far more terrible than mere failure. The case remains officially unsolved, a cold file in a cabinet, but it burns hot in our collective imagination, a stark and brutal monument to the fact that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, leaving only the ghost of a young woman and the eternal, unsettling question of who and why. While the Black Dahlia case represents a gruesome, unsolved murder steeped in factual evidence, our next legend explores a different kind of terror altogether, one that allegedly invaded a family home and was later accused of being built on a foundation of pure greed. The Amityville Horror is perhaps the most commercially successful and hotly debated haunting story of the 20th century, a tale that begins with a genuine, bloody tragedy and spirals into a supernatural saga that continues to divide believers and skeptics decades later. The story is rooted in a quiet, suburban house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. On a cold November night in 1974, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. used a high-powered rifle to murder all 6 members of his family as they slept in their beds. He initially claimed the killings were done by a mob hitman, but later confessed, stating that, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop." He was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences, a horrific and seemingly straightforward crime that should have been the end of the house's notoriety. 13 months later, in December of 1975, a new family moved in. George and Kathleen Lutz, along with Kathy's 3 children from a previous marriage, purchased the Dutch colonial home at a significantly reduced price, fully aware of its grim history. According to their later accounts, the troubles began almost immediately. They claimed that within 28 days, they were driven from their home by a relentless onslaught of paranormal phenomena, so intense they abandoned all of their possessions and never returned. Their descriptions of the haunting were a chilling catalogue of supernatural tropes. They spoke of mysterious cold spots, rooms filled with the overwhelming smell of excrement, and swarms of flies materializing on the windowsills even in the dead of winter. Green, slimy jelly would ooze from the keyholes and walls, and unseen forces would slam doors and rearrange furniture in the middle of the night. Kathleen Lutz reported being levitated from her bed, and George claimed to have awakened each morning at 3:15 a.m. The exact time of the DeFeo murders, his body covered in unexplained cuts and scratches. The most terrifying aspects of their story, however, involved specific entities. They described a sinister, demonic presence that seemed to focus on George, encouraging his descent into a sullen and angry state, and a recurring apparition of a large, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. But the most bizarre claim was the existence of Jody, a demonic, pig-like creature that would manifest in the home. The Lutzes said their young daughter, Missy, developed an imaginary friend by that name, and that they occasionally glimpsed the beast themselves, once even capturing its fleeting image in a photograph. After less than a month, the family claimed they were pushed to their absolute breaking point. In a state of sheer terror, they fled the house with only the clothes on their backs, seeking refuge with family members and vowing never to step foot inside again. Their dramatic flight and the sensational details of their story were a publicist's dream, offering a perfect sequel to the house's existing infamy and capturing the imagination of a public already fascinated by the occult. The Lutz's story was quickly immortalized in Jay Anson's 1977 book, The Amityville Horror, which became an international bestseller and spawned a blockbuster film adaptation just 2 years later, starring James Brolin and Margot Kidder. The book and movie cemented the legend in popular culture, presenting the events as a factual account and terrifying millions. However, this wave of commercial success was immediately met with a powerful tide of skepticism. Investigators and journalists began to pick apart the Lutz's claims. Perhaps the most damning critic was attorney William Weber, who had previously represented Ronald DeFeo Jr. Weber openly admitted that he, George, and Kathy had essentially concocted the haunting story over many bottles of wine as a potential book and movie deal, a scheme to make money and, in Weber's case, to lay the groundwork for a new trial for DeFeo by arguing his client was influenced by a demonic presence in the house. Other investigations further eroded the story's credibility. Paranormal researchers Ed and Lorraine Warren, who had been brought in by the Lutzes and publicly supported the haunting, were often accused of sensationalism themselves. Subsequent owners of the house lived there for years without reporting any unusual activity. Reporters noted massive inconsistencies in the Lutz's timeline and the physical impossibilities of their claims, such as the infamous locked room in the basement that was actually just a small utility space. Even the children from the family later gave conflicting accounts, with some recanting parts of the story. The financial motivation was undeniable. The Lutzes earned a fortune from the book and film rights, leading many to conclude the entire ordeal was an elaborate and brilliantly timed hoax designed to capitalize on a real-life tragedy. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence of a fabrication, the Amityville Horror refuses to die. Believers argue that while the Lutzes may have exaggerated details for dramatic effect, a core of genuine paranormal activity still occurred. They point to the testimony of other visitors to the home who reported feeling uneasy or witnessing strange events, and they question why a family would abandon all their worldly goods if they weren't truly terrified. The psychological power of the place, known as the stone tape theory, suggests that the intense trauma of the DeFeo murders could have imprinted itself on the very fabric of the house, creating a residual haunting that the Lutzes were sensitive enough to perceive. The debate itself has become the true legacy of Amityville, a case study in how a story, once released into the world, takes on a life of its own, forever suspended in the gray area between a proven hoax and an unshakable belief in the supernatural. It serves as a modern parable about the allure of a good ghost story and our deep-seated desire to believe that even in the bright light of the suburbs, darkness can still find a home. Now, let's venture from the sun-scorched coast of California into the deep, shadowy forests of the American East Coast, where a very different kind of creature has haunted the imagination for centuries. Deep within the over 1 million acres of the New Jersey Pine Barrens, a vast and ecologically unique wilderness of sandy soil and stunted pines, lurks one of America's most enduring and bizarre cryptids, the Jersey Devil. This is not a ghost or a cursed spirit, but a physical monster, a chimera born from a singular, shocking moment of maternal fury. The most popular origin story, firmly rooted in 18th century folklore, points to a woman named Jane Leeds, known as Mother Leeds. Already burdened with 12 children, she reportedly found herself pregnant with a 13th. In a moment of despair and exhaustion, she threw her hands up and cursed the unborn child, famously declaring, "Let this one be a devil." It was a desperate exclamation that, according to legend, the universe took quite literally. When the child was born in 1735, the tale says the delivery seemed normal at first. But then, the infant underwent a horrifying transformation right before the eyes of the terrified midwives and family. Its body contorted, sprouting leathery, bat-like wings from its back. Its head elongated into a horse-like skull with a piercing, savage scream. Its neck stretched and its hind legs became those of a goat, complete with cloven hooves, while a long, forked tail lashed behind it. After morphing into this grotesque form, the creature allegedly killed the midwife, let out one last unearthly shriek, and flew up the chimney, escaping into the dark, labyrinthine woods of the Pine Barrens, where it has supposedly resided ever since. This folkloric birth serves as a powerful, cautionary tale, reflecting the very real fears and dire circumstances of colonial life, the real terror of maternal mortality, the struggle of large families in poverty, and the superstitious belief that a mother's words could have such monstrous physical consequences. What truly catapulted the Jersey Devil from local campfire story to a statewide phenomenon was the incredible week of panic in January of 1909. For 7 days, the creature seemed to be everywhere at once, terrorizing communities across New Jersey and even into neighboring Pennsylvania. This was not a handful of isolated reports, it was a full-blown mass hysteria. Newspapers of the time were filled with sensational accounts. In Bristol, Pennsylvania, a police officer claimed to have fired at a winged creature with the head of a ram. In Burlington, New Jersey, a woman found strange, cloven hoofprints circling her house in the snow. Perhaps the most famous incident occurred in the town of Haddon Heights, where a respected socialite, Mrs. J.H. White, allegedly found the creature trying to carry off her young son. She screamed, and the beast dropped the boy and vanished. The story, whether true or not, was printed in the Philadelphia Public Ledger and sent a wave of primal fear through the entire region. The public and official response was swift and decisive. Schools across South Jersey and the Philadelphia area were closed down, with parents keeping their children indoors for fear the creature would snatch them. Factories and businesses saw a dramatic drop in attendance as workers were too afraid to travel in the dark. Armed posses of policemen and civilian volunteers, some with shotguns and others with sticks and rakes, scoured the woods and fields, determined to hunt the monster down. They followed those strange, unidentifiable tracks in the snow, which would often lead to a riverbank or simply vanish, as if the creature had taken flight. Some hunters even claimed to have cornered the beast, only for it to let out its blood-curdling scream and escape into the thick undergrowth. The sheer scale of the panic, documented in dozens of independent newspaper reports, suggests something powerful was happening, whether it was a genuine creature or a collective psychological event. The week cemented the Jersey Devil's place not just in folklore, but in the documented history of the state, creating a legend that was now shared by thousands of simultaneous witnesses. So, what were all these people actually seeing during that frigid January? Skeptics and biologists have offered several compelling, rational explanations that strip away the supernatural elements. The most likely candidate is the sandhill crane. These are very tall, grayish birds with a wingspan that can exceed 6 feet. When seen in low light or from a distance, their long, slender necks and legs could be misinterpreted as the limbs of a strange, bipedal creature, and their loud, rattling call is unlike any other bird sound, easily fitting the description of an eerie scream. Furthermore, the Pine Barrens, while isolated, are not completely cut off from civilization, and the 19th and early 20th centuries were a time of traveling circuses and menageries. It is entirely plausible that an exotic animal, such as a kangaroo or a large, escaped bird of prey, could have been loose in the area, its unfamiliar form sparking the initial reports that then snowballed into the mass hysteria. Another layer to the 1909 panic involves the possibility of a brilliantly executed, large-scale hoax. The Pine Barrens have a long history of harboring independent, reclusive communities known as Pineys. Some historians have suggested that a group of locals, perhaps seeking notoriety or simply enjoying the chaos, may have orchestrated the entire event. They could have fabricated the hoofprints using carved wooden stamps, staged mock attacks, and spread the rumors that fueled the newspaper frenzy. This theory gains some credibility when you consider how the sightings ceased almost as abruptly as they began, as if the pranksters decided the joke had run its course. Yet, even if the panic was born of hoaxes and misidentification, the legend had already taken on a life of its own, evolving and adapting with each new generation. Despite the rational explanations, or perhaps because of them, the Jersey Devil has refused to fade into obscurity. It has become a beloved, if fearsome, symbol of New Jersey itself. The creature is the official state demon, and its likeness is proudly displayed on T-shirts, bumper stickers, and memorabilia. It is the namesake for the National Hockey League's New Jersey Devils, a testament to how the monster has been embraced as a symbol of local identity and tenacity. The legend endures because it is so deeply intertwined with the unique, almost otherworldly landscape of the Pine Barrens themselves. This is a place of quiet mystery where the sandy trails can be disorienting and the stunted, twisted pines cast long, strange shadows. In such an environment, the idea that a centuries-old winged horror could still be lurking just out of sight feels not just possible but fitting. The Jersey Devil is more than a monster. It is the wild, untamed soul of the pines, a permanent resident whose chilling scream is a reminder that some corners of the modern world are still wild enough for legends to thrive. And from the dark woods of New Jersey, we are transported to the vast, remote wilderness of Siberia, where in the early morning of June 30th, 1908, the sky itself seemed to tear open. The Tunguska event stands as the most powerful impact event in recorded human history, a cataclysm so immense it flattened an estimated 80 million trees across 800 square miles of forest. Yet it left behind a mystery that has puzzled scientists for over a century. It began with a colossal flash of light, seen by nomadic reindeer herders hundreds of miles away, as a bluish fireball streaked across the sky. Moments later, a shockwave of unimaginable force ripped through the air, generating heat so intense it vaporized the nearest trees and set distant ones ablaze. The subsequent explosion was heard over 600 miles away, and the seismic vibrations it created were registered by instruments as far off as England. It was an atmospheric detonation with an estimated power of 10 to 15 megatons of TNT, roughly 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. For weeks after the event, the atmospheric effects were truly global and bizarrely beautiful. Night skies across Europe and Asia glowed with an unearthly luminescence. In London, it was said you could read a newspaper outdoors at midnight. This persistent, eerie twilight was caused by vast amounts of ice and dust from the vaporized object lingering in the upper atmosphere, scattering sunlight in a phenomenon now understood to be a hallmark of such high-altitude explosions. Yet, due to the extreme remoteness of the Tunguska region and the political turmoil in Russia at the time, no formal scientific expedition reached the epicenter for nearly 20 years. When geologist Leonid Kulik finally arrived in 1927, he was confronted with a scene of almost incomprehensible destruction. He and his team found a landscape of fallen trees, all radiating outward from a central point like matchsticks knocked over by a giant hand. Astonishingly, at the very center of this radial devastation, a cluster of trees remained standing, stripped of their branches and bark, transformed into ghostly, charred telegraph poles. Most baffling of all, there was no impact crater. The ground was scarred and burned, but there was no giant hole in the earth, no buried extraterrestrial object to explain the sheer scale of the annihilation. The scientific consensus, refined over decades of research, points to an air burst. The prevailing theory is that a stony meteoroid or a fragile comet fragment, roughly 120 to 200 feet in diameter, entered Earth's atmosphere at a shallow angle and a speed of over 30,000 miles per hour. The incredible friction and pressure of its descent caused it to heat up and explode in a massive fireball approximately 3 to 6 miles above the ground. This explains the lack of a crater. The object never actually struck the Earth's surface. Instead, the energy of its motion was released instantaneously in the atmosphere, creating a superheated blast of expanding gas that hammered the forest below with the force of 1,000 suns. This theory is further supported by intriguing biological evidence found decades later. Scientists studying the tree rings of the surviving Siberian pines discovered a period of accelerated growth following the event. This fertilizer effect is attributed to the immense release of nitrogen compounds from the superheated air, which essentially acted as a giant dose of plant food, raining down on the scarred landscape and giving the surviving flora an unexpected boost. Of course, a mystery of this magnitude naturally attracts more speculative and fringe explanations. In the mid-20th century, some physicists suggested the event could have been caused by the annihilation of a tiny black hole passing through the Earth. While a captivating idea, this theory fails to account for the lack of an exit wound, a corresponding event on the opposite side of the planet, and has been largely dismissed by the scientific community. A more persistent, though equally unsupported, theory is that the explosion was the result of an alien spacecraft meeting a catastrophic end. Proponents of this idea point to anecdotal reports from some later expeditions of finding unusual metallic fragments in the soil, though these were never conclusively linked to the event and were more likely remnants of later Soviet military activity in the region. The science fiction author Alexander Kazantsev famously popularized this concept in a 1946 story, weaving a narrative of a nuclear-powered Martian ship exploding in mid-air, a tale that captured the public imagination but has no basis in any physical evidence gathered at the site. Ultimately, the true legacy of the Tunguska event extends far beyond the debate over its cause. It serves as a sobering, real-world benchmark for the study of planetary defense. This single explosion, occurring over an unpopulated area, graphically illustrates the existential threat posed by near-Earth objects. Had the object's trajectory been different, arriving just a few hours later, it could have obliterated a major European city, changing the course of history in an instant. The event is a constant reminder of our planet's vulnerability as it moves through a cosmic shooting gallery. It has directly fueled modern efforts to catalog potentially hazardous asteroids and comets, and has spurred research into technologies that could one day deflect such an object should one be found on a collision course with Earth. The Tunguska event is therefore not just a historical mystery, but a permanent warning from the past, a demonstration of the raw, destructive power of our solar system, and a compelling reason to keep our eyes fixed firmly on the sky. Moving from the explosive mystery of Tunguska, we now descend into the silent, dust-filled chambers of an Egyptian tomb, where a different kind of force was said to be unleashed, one not of rock and fire, but of supernatural vengeance. The legend of the mummy's curse is perhaps the most iconic horror story to emerge from the world of archaeology, a tale inextricably linked to one of the greatest discoveries of the 20th century, the uncovering of Pharaoh Tutankhamun's burial place. When British archaeologist Howard Carter and his financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, finally broke through a sealed doorway in November of 1922, after years of fruitless searching in the Valley of the Kings, they were met with a sight that took their breath away. As Carter peered through the small hole, holding a flickering candle, Lord Carnarvon anxiously asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter's now legendary reply was, "Yes, wonderful things." The antechamber was filled with a breathtaking jumble of golden chariots, statues, and exquisite artifacts, all untouched for over 3,000 years. It was a time capsule of incalculable historical value, but in the public imagination, it would soon become something much darker, a treasure guarded by a deadly curse. The curse legend ignited just a few months later with a single, pivotal event. In April of 1923, Lord Carnarvon, the man who had funded the expedition, died in a Cairo hotel room. His death was not mysterious in itself. He had been severely weakened by a mosquito bite on his cheek that he had nicked while shaving, leading to a fatal blood poisoning and pneumonia. But the circumstances were irresistibly dramatic for the newspapers. It was reported that at the exact moment of Carnarvon's death, all the lights in Cairo mysteriously went out, and back in England, his beloved terrier, Susie, was said to have let out a mournful howl and dropped dead. Most tantalizingly, rumors began to circulate of an inscription found over the tomb's entrance, a chilling warning. "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." This specific inscription was never actually found by Carter's team, but the story took on a life of its own, fueled by a voracious media hungry for a sensational story to sell papers. The public was captivated, and a pattern was instantly established. Every subsequent death of anyone remotely connected to the tomb's opening was viewed as another victim of the pharaoh's wrath. The list of the cursed grew rapidly, creating a compelling, if coincidental, narrative. A close friend of Carnarvon who was present at the tomb's official opening died of a fever shortly after. A radiologist who X-rayed the mummy before it was unwrapped passed away. A wealthy American who had visited the site was murdered. Howard Carter's personal secretary, Richard Bethel, was found dead in his bed from an apparent heart attack, and his father, who had no direct connection to the tomb, supposedly threw himself from his 7th-floor apartment shortly after. Each new obituary was presented as further proof, and the legend was effortlessly woven into a tapestry of supernatural retribution. The curse became a global phenomenon, a staple of Hollywood films and pulp novels that depicted reanimated mummies stalking those who had desecrated their sacred rest, an image that has persisted for a century. But when we pull back the shroud of sensationalism, a much more rational and fascinating picture emerges. Howard Carter, the man who had the most intimate and prolonged contact with the tomb and its contents, lived for another 16 years, dying of natural causes at the age of 64. He publicly dismissed the curse as Tommy rot. So, if not a supernatural force, what might have been at work? One compelling scientific theory points to the very real dangers of a sealed environment. Modern microbiological analysis suggests that ancient, sealed tombs could have developed their own unique ecosystems. Prolonged darkness, humidity, and the presence of organic offerings like food and mummified bodies could have allowed potentially harmful bacteria and fungi to thrive in the still air. When the tomb was first opened, these ancient microorganisms, such as Aspergillus niger, a common mold that can be deadly to those with compromised immune systems, could have been inhaled by the excavators. Lord Carnarvon was already in poor health, making him particularly vulnerable to such a biological attack. The curse, in this light, was not a spiritual vengeance but a very physical one, a consequence of disturbing a 3,000-year-old Petri dish. Beyond biology, simple statistics and psychology offer the most complete explanation. The group of people involved in the excavation and subsequent study was not particularly small, and many of them were older men from the upper echelons of British society, a demographic with a naturally higher mortality rate. When you track the lifespans of the 24 core people present at the tomb's opening, the average age at death was over 70, which was quite normal for the era. The curse narrative was a classic case of confirmation bias. Once the idea was planted by the media, any bad luck or death was immediately seen as evidence, while all the people who lived long, healthy lives were ignored. The story was simply too good for newspapers to resist. It sold copies and captivated a public that was both fascinated by and slightly fearful of the ancient, exotic culture of Egypt. The curse tapped into a deep-seated Western anxiety about meddling with forces we don't understand and desecrating sacred spaces, a theme that resonates across many cultures. Ultimately, the mummy's curse tells us less about ancient Egypt and more about the power of storytelling. It reveals how a combination of tragic coincidence, scientific ignorance, and media sensationalism can create a legend so powerful that it forever overshadows the true, wondrous story of a boy king and the incredible civilization he represented. Leaving behind the scorching deserts of Egypt, we find ourselves in a landscape of a completely different kind of mist and mystery: the deep, dark, and peat-stained waters of Scotland's Loch Ness. This is the home of perhaps the world's most famous cryptid, a creature of such enduring fame that she has her own affectionate nickname, Nessie. The legend is not, as many believe, a 20th century invention for tourists. Its roots stretch back into the misty dawn of Scottish history, to the life of an Irish monk named Saint Columba. According to a biography written about him a century after his death, in the year 565, Columba was traveling near the River Ness when he came upon a group of locals burying a man. They explained that the poor soul had been mauled to death by a water beast while swimming. Intrigued, Columba ordered one of his own followers to swim across the river. As the man entered the water, the beast surfaced, rushing toward him with a great roar. But Columba, with unwavering faith, made the sign of the cross and commanded, "You will go no farther. Do not touch the man, go back at once." The story claims the creature froze as if pulled by ropes, fled in terror, and never bothered the people again. While this tale is wrapped in the language of hagiography, a saint demonstrating divine power over a local monster, it establishes a crucial idea that has persisted for 1,500 years: something unusual lives in these waters. The modern legend of the Loch Ness Monster, however, truly ignited in the 1930s, a period that perfectly aligned new technology with a public hungry for wonder. In April 1933, a new road was completed along the loch's northern shore, providing drivers with an unobstructed view of the water for the first time. That same month, a local couple driving on this new road reported seeing an enormous animal, likening it to a dragon or prehistoric monster, cross the road ahead of them and disappear into the loch with a tremendous splash. This account was published in the Inverness Courier, and the editor, Evan Barron, is the one who first coined the term Loch Ness Monster. The story was a sensation, and it opened the floodgates. Throughout the rest of the 30s, sightings poured in, describing a creature with a long neck, a small head, and a humped back. The legend was supercharged in 1934 with the publication of the most iconic image in the history of cryptozoology, the surgeon's photograph. Taken by a London gynecologist named Robert Kenneth Wilson, the photo appeared to show a long, slender neck and a small head emerging from the water's surface. It was published in the Daily Mail under the dramatic headline, "The Monster Photographed at Last," and for decades, this grainy, black and white image was considered the single best piece of evidence that a plesios or like creature had survived into the modern era. The most popular and thrilling theory to explain Nessie is without a doubt that she is a surviving plesios, or a marine reptile from the age of dinosaurs that somehow avoided extinction for 66 million years. Proponents of this idea argue that the general anatomy fits the most common eyewitness descriptions perfectly: the long neck, the flippers, and the bulky body. They point to the loch's immense size and unique ecology. Loch Ness is vast, over 22 miles long, a mile wide, and reaching depths of nearly 800 feet. Its volume is greater than all the lakes in England and Wales combined, providing plenty of space for a breeding population of large creatures to hide. Furthermore, the water is incredibly dark, stained a deep brown by peat from the surrounding hills, creating near-zero visibility just a few feet below the surface, an ideal environment for an elusive animal to evade detection. The loch is also connected to the sea by the River Ness, offering a potential route for marine animals to have entered in the distant past and become trapped. However, this theory faces immense scientific hurdles. A breeding population would require not one, but dozens of such creatures, making their complete invisibility statistically unlikely. The loch is also ecologically poor, with insufficient fish stocks to support a population of large carnivores. Most damningly, plesiosaurs were air breathers like whales and would need to surface frequently, making them far more likely to be conclusively photographed by now in our era of high-resolution smartphone cameras and constant satellite surveillance. Given the severe problems with the plesiosaur hypothesis, scientists have proposed several more plausible, if less romantic, explanations. One of the leading candidates is the giant eel. Loch Ness is known to be home to European eels, which can grow to considerable sizes. It is theoretically possible that a few individuals could reach abnormal, monstrous proportions due to a genetic mutation or simply old age. A 4 or 5 meter long eel, seen undulating at the surface, could easily be misinterpreted as the multiple humps or long neck of a more fantastical beast. Another common natural phenomenon is the floating log. The forests around Loch Ness are filled with ancient Scots pines. When these trees fall into the water, their root systems, heavy with soil and stones, can sink while the buoyant trunk remains afloat just beneath the surface. As the wood waterlogs and decomposes, it can release trapped gases, causing the log to suddenly rise or roll, creating the illusion of a creature diving or moving. This rotating log theory can account for many sightings of a single hump or a series of humps breaking the water. Then there are the effects of the loch's unique geography and weather. Strong winds can create standing waves that look unlike normal wave patterns, and temperature inversions can create mirages known as fata morgana, distorting the image of a boat, a seal, or even a swimming deer, magnifying it and making it appear like an unrecognizable monster. As for the famous evidence that fueled the legend, much of it has not stood the test of time. The surgeon's photograph, once the gold standard of proof, was revealed in the 1990s to be an elaborate hoax. The man behind it, not the respectable Dr. Wilson but a big game hunter named Marmaduke Wetherell, had been hired by the Daily Mail to find the monster. After an embarrassing incident where he presented monster tracks that were actually made with a dried hippopotamus foot umbrella stand, he sought revenge on the newspaper. With his stepson, Christian Sperling, he constructed a model monster neck and head, attached it to a toy submarine and photographed it in the water. Wilson, a friend, simply lent his name to give the photo credibility. Other famous bits of evidence have proven equally flimsy or inconclusive. A much-touted sonar contact from the 1970s, known as the Big Grey, showed a large moving object but could have been a seal, a large school of fish, or even a temperature-driven layer of water known as a thermocline. Numerous high-tech expeditions, some funded by major institutions and even equipped with submarines, have scanned the loch from top to bottom. While they have found unexplained sonar contacts and intriguing underwater structures, they have never found any bones, carcasses, or definitive biological evidence of a large, unknown animal. Despite the lack of concrete proof, the legend of the Loch Ness Monster is far more powerful than the sum of its parts. It has become a cultural and economic force, drawing millions of tourists to the Scottish Highlands every year, all hoping for a glimpse of the elusive creature. The mystery persists because it taps into a fundamental human desire for there to be undiscovered wonders left in the world, for the map to still have a few blank spaces. It represents the romance of the unknown, the possibility that even in our modern, scientifically mapped era, a great secret can still be waiting in the deep, dark water. The debate over Nessie's existence is a fascinating microcosm of the conflict between belief and skepticism, between our longing for magic and the rigorous demands of evidence. Whether she is a leftover dinosaur, a giant eel, or simply a beautiful myth born from logs, waves, and wishful thinking, the Loch Ness Monster has secured her place as the world's most beloved and enduring lake monster, a timeless inhabitant of the shadowy realm between what we know and what we dream. But if the monster of Loch Ness represents a mystery of presence, the hopeful belief that something is there, our next legend showcases a mystery of absence, a vast expanse of ocean where things are said to vanish without a trace. We now navigate into the most infamous stretch of water in the world, the Bermuda Triangle, a region roughly bounded by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. This area has become a global byword for the inexplicable, a place where the normal rules of physics and navigation are rumored to break down, swallowing ships and planes into a silent, watery void. The legend paints a picture of a supernatural danger zone, but the truth behind this myth is a fascinating story of how real tragedies can be woven together by speculation and sensationalism to create a modern maritime monster. The foundation of the triangle's sinister reputation was poured in the 20th century, largely built upon a few high-profile and genuinely puzzling disappearances. Perhaps the most famous of these is the case of Flight 19. On December 5, 1945, 5 United States Navy Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on a routine training mission. The flight consisted of 5 student pilots and their experienced instructor, Lieutenant Charles Taylor. About an hour and a half into the flight, something went terribly wrong. Radio transmissions indicated that Taylor's compasses had malfunctioned. He became convinced they were over the Florida Keys, when in reality they were far out over the Atlantic. His confusion was palpable in his transmissions. "Both my compasses are out," he reported, "and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale. I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down." For the next several hours, the flight, now hopelessly lost, flew aimlessly over the open ocean as the weather deteriorated and darkness fell. Their final, chilling transmissions included phrases like, "We can't be sure of any direction." "Everything is wrong, strange." A massive air and sea search was launched, but no trace of the 5 aircraft or their 14 crewmen was ever found. To compound the tragedy, one of the search and rescue planes, a Martin Mariner flying boat with 13 men aboard, also vanished without a single distress call. The loss of 6 planes and 27 men in a single day was a profound shock, and it provided the cornerstone for the Bermuda Triangle legend. Another foundational case predates Flight 19 and involves a loss of life on an even more staggering scale. The USS Cyclops, a 540-foot-long Navy collier, was a massive vessel tasked with carrying coal to fuel the American fleet during World War I. In March 1918, having delivered its cargo in Brazil, the ship set sail for Baltimore with over 300 people on board. It made a routine stop in Barbados and then vanished. No distress signal was ever received, and an extensive search found no wreckage, no lifeboats, not a single piece of debris. The Cyclops and its 309 crew and passengers were simply gone. It remains the single largest non-combat loss of life in the history of the United States Navy. The complete lack of any evidence, combined with the ship's size and the wartime context, created a vacuum of explanation that was easily filled with theories of the extraordinary. These 2 incidents, Flight 19 and the USS Cyclops, became the twin pillars of the myth, held up as proof that this particular patch of ocean was inherently and uniquely deadly. But when we move from sensational headlines to sober analysis, a very different picture emerges. The ocean is an inherently dangerous place, and the Bermuda Triangle is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. With so much traffic crossing its waters, statistically, some vessels are bound to meet with disaster. the so-called mystery of the triangle begins to evaporate under the scrutiny of logical explanations. One of the most powerful and frequently overlooked factors is the Gulf Stream. This is a massive, warm, and incredibly swift ocean current that flows northward through the Triangle region. A vessel experiencing engine trouble or a plane that makes an emergency water landing could be pulled rapidly away from its last known position by this powerful river within the sea. Wreckage and bodies would be scattered over a vast area in a very short time, making them nearly impossible to locate, which perfectly explains the lack of debris in many of these cases. Then there is the region's notoriously violent and unpredictable weather. The area is a breeding ground for sudden, powerful storms that can materialize with little warning. Furthermore, it is prone to what are known as rogue waves. These are colossal, spontaneous walls of water that can reach heights of 100 feet, capable of breaking a large ship in two and sending it to the bottom before any distress call can be made. Modern science also offers a dramatic geological explanation: methane hydrates. The theory suggests that large deposits of methane gas trapped in solid form on the ocean floor could occasionally erupt. If a massive bubble of methane were to rise and break the surface, it could, in theory, drastically reduce the density of the water. A ship floating above would lose its buoyancy instantly and sink without a trace. Similarly, if a large bubble of methane were to rise into the air, it could disrupt the airflow, causing an aircraft's engines to stall or creating an explosive mixture in the air around it. While this is a compelling idea, there is no direct evidence that such an event has ever caused a disappearance in the Bermuda Triangle. Human error and the limitations of technology in the mid-20th century account for many more incidents. The case of Flight 19 is a textbook example. Lieutenant Charles Taylor was a seasoned pilot, but he was also known to be prone to getting lost. On that fateful day, he dismissed the readings from his own navigational equipment and the suggestions of his student pilots, insisting they were somewhere they were not. Flying over a featureless ocean with a malfunctioning compass, in growing darkness and worsening weather, the outcome was tragically predictable. The Martin mariner that vanished during the search likely succumbed to a known danger. These flying boats were nicknamed flying gas tanks because they were prone to fuel vapor leaks, and a single spark could cause a catastrophic explosion, which would explain why it disappeared without a trace. As for the USS Cyclops, the most plausible theory is a structural failure. The ship was heavily overloaded with manganese ore, a cargo known to shift suddenly in heavy seas. Combined with design flaws and the stormy conditions common in the area, the ship could have capsized and sunk within minutes. The real creation of the Bermuda Triangle as we know it was not the work of the ocean, but the work of writers. The myth was largely constructed in the 1950s and 60s by authors like Edward Van Winkle Jones and, most famously, Charles Berlitz, whose 1974 book The Bermuda Triangle became an international bestseller. These authors selectively compiled a list of disappearances, often omitting key facts like storm conditions or mechanical failures, and presented them as a pattern of unexplained phenomena. They suggested wild possibilities, from alien abductions to remnants of the lost city of Atlantis, capturing the public's imagination during a time of growing interest in the paranormal. The media eagerly amplified these stories, and the legend became a self-perpetuating cycle. Any new disappearance in the area was automatically attributed to the mystery of the triangle, reinforcing the myth while ignoring the far more mundane but equally tragic realities of maritime and aviation disaster. In the end, the Bermuda Triangle stands not as a supernatural vortex, but as a powerful monument to the human need for mystery. It shows us how easily facts can be twisted into folklore, and how a busy, dangerous, but ordinary part of the ocean can be transformed into one of history's most enduring and chilling legends. While our journey has taken us from ancient curses to high seas mysteries, Some legends are born not in the distant past, but in the heart of the modern media age, proving that our capacity for creating monsters is as alive today as it ever was. This brings us to the chilling and distinctly modern tale of the chupacabra, a creature whose very name, goat sucker, from the Spanish chupar to suck and cabra goat, instantly conjures a visceral image of a bizarre and ruthless predator. The legend erupted with startling speed in the mid-1990s, not from misty highlands or deep forests, but from the rural communities of Puerto Rico. The first major wave of reports began in March of 1995, when residents of the town of Mocha reported a string of mysterious animal deaths. Farmers would find their livestock, goats, sheep, and chickens, dead and completely drained of blood, often with 3 peculiar puncture wounds in a triangular pattern on their chests. The killings were methodical and bloodless, suggesting a predator unlike any they had known, one that seemed to be hunting not for food but for something far more eerie. The creature's initial physical description was as terrifying as its alleged methods. The first eyewitnesses described a being that seemed ripped from a science fiction nightmare. It was said to be about 3 to 4 feet tall, standing on its powerful hind legs like a small, muscular dinosaur. Its skin was a leathery, grayish-green, and its most defining features were a row of sharp, hedgehog-like quills running from the crown of its head down the length of its spine. Its eyes were reported to be large, oval, and glowing with an intense red or black color, and it was said to have long, sharp claws and fangs perfect for its blood-draining specialty. This reptilian, bipedal form was the original chupacabra, a creature that seemed to have no clear place in the natural world, fueling speculation that it was anything from a genetic experiment gone horribly wrong to an extraterrestrial being left behind by a UFO. However, as the legend migrated from Puerto Rico and spread like wildfire throughout Latin America and into the southern United States, particularly Texas and Mexico, its appearance underwent a dramatic and telling transformation. The alien-looking reptile began to fade from reports, replaced by a more familiar yet still unsettling creature. The modern chupacabra, the one most often captured in blurry photographs or presented as evidence today, is almost always a hairless, canine-like animal. It's described as being the size of a coyote or a large dog, with leathery, gray-blue skin, pronounced back legs, and a pronounced spinal ridge. This shift in description is absolutely crucial to understanding the true nature of the chupacabra phenomenon. It marks the point where a truly anomalous monster evolved into something that could be, and often is mistaken for a known animal suffering from a severe and tragic medical condition. This leads us to the most compelling and scientifically grounded explanation for the vast majority of chupacabra sightings: the tragic case of animals afflicted with severe mange. Sarcoptic mange is a devastating skin disease caused by parasitic mites that burrow into an animal's skin, leading to intense itching, hair loss, and severe scabbing. For wild canines like coyotes, foxes, and even domestic dogs, an advanced case of mange is a death sentence. It causes them to lose all their fur, their skin becomes thickened, leathery, and gray, and they often become emaciated and weak. The combination of these symptoms creates a creature that looks nothing like a healthy coyote or dog. Its hairless state makes its spinal column and hip bones protrude prominently, creating that spiky back so often reported. Its weakened condition forces it to seek easier prey than its usual wild game, bringing it into closer contact with farms and livestock. When a sick, mangy coyote is seen lurking near a farm where an animal is later found dead, the connection is made and the legend is born anew. The animal isn't draining blood in a supernatural way. It's simply too ill to consume the entire carcass, and its attacks may appear bizarre because its physical state prevents it from hunting normally. The incredible spread of the chupacabra legend can also be viewed as a textbook example of mass hysteria, or what sociologists call a mass psychogenic illness. In this process, a community's shared anxiety finds a physical symbol, a monster onto which it can project its fears. In the case of Puerto Rico and other rural areas, these fears were often rooted in very real economic and political anxieties. The 1990s were a time of significant change, and the unexplained loss of livestock, which represents a family's livelihood, created a vacuum of understanding that was perfectly filled by the chupacabra. Once the idea was introduced by local media, which reported on the mysterious beast with gripping headlines, any unusual animal death or strange sighting was filtered through that new lens. The power of suggestion is immense. When people are primed to see a monster, they are far more likely to interpret an unfamiliar animal, or even a known one in poor health, as the dreaded chupacabra. The legend became a contagion in its own right, spreading through news reports, word of mouth, and eventually the burgeoning internet, leaping across borders with ease. Despite the rational explanations, the chupacabra has firmly cemented its place in contemporary folklore, evolving into a potent cultural symbol. It represents the fear of the unknown that persists even in our technologically advanced world, a reminder that the edges of our maps, while charted by satellites, can still hold shadows in our own backyards. The creature has been embraced in popular culture, featured in television shows like The X-Files, countless books, and even a series of Mexican horror films. For cryptozoologists, those who search for legendary animals, the chupacabra remains a holy grail, a subject of ongoing investigation and debate. For the communities it haunts, it has become a part of local identity. Towns sometimes host chupacabra festivals, and the sale of related merchandise provides a small economic boost from curious tourists and monster hunters. The legend endures because it is so adaptable. It is a monster for the modern age, born from media, spread by globalization, and sustained by our timeless fascination with the creature that might be lurking just beyond the porch light. A stark reminder that the process of myth-making is a living, breathing part of our world. But for those who dream of treasure not lost at sea, but buried deep within the earth, one legend has stood above all others as the ultimate puzzle, drawing in fortune seekers for over 200 years with a siren song of hidden wealth and ingeniously designed traps. This is the enigma of the Oak Island Money Pit, a saga that began in 1795 with a simple discovery by a teenager named Daniel McGinnis. Exploring a small, densely wooded island off the coast of Nova Scotia, McGinnis noticed a peculiar circular depression in the ground beneath an old oak tree from which a ship's pulley hung from a sawed-off branch. Convinced he had found evidence of buried pirate treasure, he returned with two friends and began to dig. What they unearthed was not a chest of gold, but the beginnings of a mystery that would consume millions of dollars and countless lives. Just a few feet down, they hit a layer of flagstones not native to the island. Then, at 10 and 20 feet, they found platforms of solid oak logs embedded in the walls of the shaft. This was no random hole. It was a carefully constructed, multi-layered project of immense effort and deliberate concealment. As decades turned into centuries, each new expedition delving deeper into the pit only uncovered more baffling and treacherous obstacles. At around 90 feet, a team in the early 1800s made a tantalizing discovery, a large flat stone inscribed with a cryptic message of symbols. While the original stone was later lost, transcribed copies of the cipher were allegedly decoded to read, 40 feet below, 2 million pounds are buried. This was the ultimate tease, promising unimaginable wealth just out of reach, but the pit was designed to protect its secret. Just below this point, the digger's auger, a tool used for boring, brought up yet more evidence, 3 small gold links as if from a chain, fueling the fire of speculation. The true genius or menace of the construction was revealed when the diggers broke through a layer of wood at around 98 feet, only to have the shaft suddenly begin flooding with seawater. No matter how much they bailed, the water level would not drop. They had inadvertently triggered a brilliant defense mechanism. subsequent investigations revealed a complex network of artificial flooding tunnels, often called box drains, that connected the base of the money pit to the ocean at Smith's Cove, over 500 feet away. These tunnels were lined with cleverly placed coconut fiber and eelgrass, acting as a natural filter to allow water in while keeping silt out, ensuring the pit would remain flooded for any would-be treasure hunter. The sheer sophistication of this system has fueled endless debate about what could possibly be important enough to warrant such an elaborate and permanent safeguard. The most romantic theory points toward pirate gold, specifically the legendary loot of Captain William Kidd or the infamous Edward Blackbeard Teach. The logic is compelling. Who else would have the resources and the need to hide treasure in such a permanent and destructive manner? Yet, the engineering seems far beyond the typical pirate modus operandi. Another school of thought suggests this was the work of the British military, perhaps used to hide the contents of the British treasury during the American Revolution, or even the lost jewels of the French crown after the monarchy's fall. But perhaps the most fascinating theories venture into the realm of the historical and sacred. Some researchers have proposed that the pit was constructed by the Knights Templar to conceal their most sacred relics, which they smuggled out of Europe after their persecution in the 14th century. This theory posits that what lies at the bottom of the pit is nothing less than the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant. An even more esoteric idea suggests it holds the original Shakespearean manuscripts, purporting that the works were actually written by Sir Francis Bacon and hidden away to preserve his secret identity. Each theory carries its own compelling narrative, but all must contend with the same unyielding reality of the pit itself. The modern era of the hunt has been dominated by the work of Rick and Marty Lagina, whose lifelong fascination with the mystery evolved into the History Channel's reality series, The Curse of Oak Island. Their efforts, backed by significant financial resources and advanced technology, have taken the investigation further than ever before. They have not been focused solely on the original money pit shaft, which has been hopelessly compromised by 2 centuries of chaotic digging. Instead, they have employed sonar scans, seismic testing, and massive drilling campaigns to explore the island's subterranean secrets. Their work has uncovered compelling new evidence, including centuries-old human-worked wooden structures deep underground in what they call the Smith's Cove flood tunnel system, confirming the amazing engineering feat first hinted at 200 years ago. They have also recovered a wealth of artifacts that prove human activity on the island dates back to pre-Columbian times, as well as from the 16th and 17th centuries, including a Spanish silver coin, a medieval lead cross, and pieces of parchment and human-written leather pulled from the depths. Each find is a piece of the puzzle, yet the central mystery remains stubbornly intact. So why, after all this time and effort, does the money pit continue to guard its secret? The reasons are as complex as the pit itself. The very nature of the early excavations destroyed much of the original evidence, with multiple groups digging haphazardly and collapsing tunnels in their frantic search. The constant, relentless flooding has made any direct access to the theorized treasure chamber nearly impossible without monumental engineering efforts of their own. There is also the sobering possibility that the treasure, if it ever existed, was quietly removed long ago, perhaps by the original builders themselves, leaving behind an empty, booby-trapped shell designed to forever torment those who seek it. And then there is the so-called curse, an enduring piece of folklore that claims 7 men must die before the island will yield its treasure. To date, at least 6 individuals have lost their lives in pursuit of the island's secret, adding a somber and tragic weight to the entire endeavor. The enduring power of the Oak Island money pit lies in this perfect storm of historical clues, ingenious engineering, tragic setbacks, and the unshakable human belief that immense wealth and profound historical truth are waiting just 40 feet, or perhaps 4 inches, beyond our grasp, a secret forever lapped by the cold, salt water of the North Atlantic. But even as we navigate the tangible and treacherous pursuits of treasure hunters, we must turn our attention to a very different kind of loss, one not of gold but of children, memorialized in one of Europe's most haunting and enduring cautionary tales. The story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin is a stark narrative woven into the very fabric of German folklore, a chilling account that begins with a simple agreement and ends with an unimaginable tragedy. According to the legend, in the year 1284, the prosperous town of Hamelin was suffering under a devastating plague of rats. The rodents were everywhere, consuming food supplies, spreading disease, and driving the citizens to despair. Just when all hope seemed lost, a mysterious stranger appeared in the town square. He was a strikingly colorful figure, clad in a coat of many hues, and he introduced himself as a rat catcher, promising to rid the town of its scourge for a specific fee. The desperate town council agreed, swearing to pay him a princely sum once the job was done. The piper, true to his word, raised his strange, enchanting pipe to his lips and began to play a mesmerizing melody. As the eerie, compelling tune echoed through the streets, a miraculous and terrifying sight unfolded. From every cellar, attic, and sewer, the rats came pouring forth, drawn by the hypnotic music. They swarmed around the piper, who then turned and walked calmly toward the river Weser, his musical spell forcing the entire horde to follow him into the water, where every single rat drowned. With the town saved, the piper returned to claim his reward, but the council, seeing that the threat was gone, reneged on their promise, offering him only a fraction of the agreed-upon payment out of sheer greed and arrogance. The piper, furious at this betrayal, left the town hall with a cold, silent anger. He vowed a terrible revenge, and he did not have to wait long to exact it. On the 26th of June, a Sunday, while most of the town's adults were in church, the Pied Piper returned. This time, he played a different, even more captivating tune, a melody not for rats but for the souls of the young. The children of Hamelin, from toddlers to teenagers, were irresistibly drawn from their homes, laughing and dancing as they followed the enchanting music. The piper led them through the streets and directly toward the nearby Koppenberg mountain. As the townspeople emerged from church, they could only watch in helpless horror as a mysterious doorway opened in the side of the hill. The piper, with his unearthly melody, led 130 of their children inside, and the entrance sealed shut behind them, leaving only 2 children behind: a little boy who was lame and could not keep up, and a little girl who was deaf and could not hear the music. These 2 survivors were left to tell the tale of how their entire generation vanished into the heart of the mountain, never to be seen again. While the story reads like a classic fairy tale, its persistence is rooted in a startling claim of historical fact. A stained glass window from around 1300, which was installed in Hamelin's market church and later destroyed, depicted the colorful piper and the departing children, and several town chronicles from as early as the 14th century record the event as a real tragedy. One entry from the town council's ledger reads, "In the year 1284, on the day of Saints John and Paul, 130 children born in Hamelin were led away by a piper dressed in many colors to Calvary near the Koppen and lost." This matter-of-fact recording of a mass disappearance has fueled centuries of speculation about what historical kernel of truth might lie beneath the supernatural veneer. Historians and scholars have proposed several plausible theories to explain the grim origin of the Pied Piper legend. One of the most compelling interpretations is that the story is a metaphorical account of the Children's Crusade of 1212, a disastrous event in which thousands of young people set out for the Holy Land, many of whom are believed to have been sold into slavery or simply perished. The dates don't align perfectly, but the theme of children being led to their doom by a charismatic leader could have been transposed onto Hamelin's local history. A more geographically specific theory suggests the piper was actually a recruiter or locator, employed by nobles to entice young people from overpopulated German towns to migrate eastward to settle newly conquered territories in Moravia, Transylvania, or the Baltic region. This was a common practice in the Middle Ages, and the children, in this context, would represent the town's young adults who left for a new life, a departure that would have been a profound and permanent loss for their families, who might never see or hear from them again. A third and particularly dark theory points to an epidemic. The phrase, "led away to Calvary," could be a medieval euphemism for death, with Calvary being the hill where Jesus was crucified. It is possible that the town was struck by a deadly plague, such as the bubonic plague or an outbreak of dancing mania, which primarily killed the children. The piper in this scenario would be personified death itself, his colorful robes representing the symptoms of a horrible disease and his pipe symbolizing the delirium that overtook the victims before they succumbed. The two children left behind would then be the sole survivors of this devastating outbreak, their specific disabilities perhaps granting them a literal immunity to whatever pathogen swept through the town. This interpretation transforms the story from a fantasy into a stark record of communal trauma and loss. Beyond its possible historical roots, the tale of the Pied Piper serves as a powerful and multi-layered moral lesson that has resonated for centuries. On its surface, it is a straightforward fable about the severe consequences of breaking a promise and the dangers of greed and hypocrisy. The town leaders, by refusing to honor their debt, brought a punishment upon themselves far worse than the original problem. But on a deeper level, the story explores the profound theme of lost innocence. The children, pure and trusting, are the ultimate victims of the adults' moral failure. Their hypnotized march into the mountain represents a stolen future, a chilling reminder that the selfish actions of one generation can irrevocably doom the next. The piper himself is a fascinatingly ambiguous figure, part savior, part avenging angel, and part demon. He is wronged, and his quest for justice is understandable, yet the method of his revenge is so monstrously disproportionate that he becomes a villain in his own right, making the story a complex study in morality where there are no true heroes. The cultural footprint of this dark legend is immense. It was immortalized for English-speaking audiences by Robert Browning's 1842 poem, The Pied Piper of Hamelin, which popularized the specific details and the rhythmic, storytelling cadence most are familiar with today. The story has been adapted into countless other forms, from operas and ballets to novels and psychological thrillers, each iteration exploring different facets of its core themes. In the modern town of Hamelin, now Hameln, the legend is an integral part of the local identity. The street believed to be the one from which the children departed, the Bungenstrasse, has no music or dancing permitted on it to this day as a mark of respect. The town stages regular reenactments and features rat figures in its culinary treats, embracing the very story that marks its most tragic day. The Pied Piper endures because it is more than just a spooky story. It is a timeless warning about the cost of deceit and a poignant, heartbreaking memorial to the vulnerability of the young, a melody of loss that continues to echo down through the centuries. Now, let us journey from the cobblestone streets of Hamelin to the shadowy, wooded lanes of a quiet American glen, where a different kind of phantom rides, his presence heralded not by a piper's tune, but by the thunderous pounding of hooves and the chill of autumn air. Nestled along the Hudson River, the secluded valley of Sleepy Hollow has become synonymous with one of the most iconic specters in all of literature, the Headless Horseman. This terrifying figure was immortalized in Washington Irving's 1820 story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, a tale that perfectly captures the blend of folklore, history, and spine-tingling horror that defines the American Gothic tradition. The legend tells of a Hessian soldier, a mercenary fighting for the British during the Revolutionary War, whose head was cleanly carried off by a cannonball during some unnamed violent skirmish. Denied a proper burial, his restless spirit is condemned to haunt the vicinity of the old Dutch church and its surrounding burial ground, rising each night from his grave to embark on a desperate, endless search for his lost head. Irving's genius lay in his masterful setting of this supernatural tale within a very specific and tangible historical moment, the post-Revolutionary War era. The Hudson Valley was a region still deeply marked by the recent conflict, dotted with the graves of fallen soldiers and alive with the lingering resentments and fears of a war fought on home soil. The choice of a Hessian trooper as the Spectre was particularly potent. These German mercenaries hired by King George III were often portrayed in American propaganda as particularly brutal and fearsome, making the decapitated Hessian a perfect vessel for the community's unresolved anxieties about the violence of their recent past. He is a ghost literally born from the trauma of war, a piece of the young nation's violent birth that refuses to stay buried, forever riding through the landscape as a chilling reminder of the blood that was spilled to create it. This grounding in a real, historical context gives the legend a weight and credibility that a purely fictional monster could never achieve, allowing the fear to feel both ancient and immediate. At the heart of Irving's story is a compelling conflict between two worldviews personified by its central characters. On one side we have Ichabod Crane, the superstitious, lanky, and intellectual schoolmaster from Connecticut. Ichabod is a man deeply immersed in the folklore and ghost stories of the region, his imagination so vivid that every rustling leaf or hooting owl is a potential omen. He represents the old world of belief and fear, a mind-fertile ground for the seeds of the supernatural. His rival for the affections of the wealthy Katrina Van Tassel is Brombones, the local hero, brawny, boisterous, and deeply practical. Brom is the embodiment of the new American spirit, rational, skeptical, and grounded in the physical world. He scoffs at ghost stories and relies on his own strength and cunning. This dynamic sets the stage for the story's infamous climax, where Ichabod, riding home from a party at the Van Tassel farm after being spurned by Katrina, is pursued by the dreaded Headless Horseman himself. The spectral chase is a masterpiece of suspense, culminating in the Hessian hurling his own severed head, which Ichabod discovers to be a grinning, lifeless pumpkin, at the terrified schoolmaster who vanishes from Sleepy Hollow forever. The brilliant ambiguity of this ending is what has kept the legend alive and debated for 2 centuries. Did Ichabod Crane truly encounter a vengeful ghost from beyond the grave, or was he the victim of an elaborate and cruel prank orchestrated by his rival, Brombones, who is known to be a skilled horseman and rider? Irving never provides a definitive answer, leaving it to the reader to decide where superstition ends and reality begins. This clever narrative choice allows the story to function on multiple levels. It can be read as a genuine ghost story that confirms the existence of the supernatural, or as a witty satire on the power of fear and the credulity of an overactive imagination. Brombones, after all, becomes uncharacteristically silent and never boasts about the event, and a hint is dropped that Ichabod was later spotted alive and well in New York City, having simply fled the humiliating situation. The tale masterfully suggests that the most terrifying monsters are not always the ones that ride headless through the night, but the ones we create in our own minds, fueled by insecurity, rivalry, and a deep-seated fear of the unknown. While Irving's story is a work of fiction, it was undoubtedly inspired by the rich soil of Hudson Valley folklore and his own experiences. The area was rife with tales of phantom riders and haunted bridges, and Irving likely drew upon German and Dutch legends of headless spirits. Some historians suggest a potential real-life model for Ichabod Crane may have been a schoolteacher Irving encountered, while the character's name was later given to a real United States Army officer he met, creating a delightful blurring of fact and fiction. The real power of the Headless Horseman, however, lies in how he has galloped straight out of the pages of literature and into the very heart of American popular culture. The story has been adapted into countless films, television shows, and theatrical productions, with perhaps the most iconic being Disney's 1949 animated feature, which cemented the image of the ghastly, pumpkin-wielding rider in the minds of generations. The town of North Tarrytown, New York, officially changed its name to Sleepy Hollow in 1996, fully embracing its legendary identity. Every Halloween, the region celebrates with haunted hayrides, reenactments, and tours of the old Dutch church burial ground, where a headstone now marks the supposed grave of the horseman himself. The Headless Horseman is no longer just a character in a book. He is a permanent, spectral resident of the American imagination, a symbol of the autumnal season and the thin veil between the living and the dead, forever searching not just for his lost head, but for a place in our collective fear and fascination. Yet high above the foggy hollows and cursed islands, in a realm of thin air and blinding whiteness, another kind of giant stalks the human imagination. We now trek into the planet's most majestic and unforgiving mountains to confront the king of all mountain cryptids, the Yeti, or as it's romantically known in the West, the abominable snowman. The legend is woven into the very fabric of Himalayan culture, particularly among the Sherpa people, for whom the Yeti is not merely a monster, but a fundamental part of the mountain's spiritual ecology. In Sherpa folklore, this large, bipedal, ape-like creature is often called Migoi, or the wild man of the snows, and it is portrayed as a powerful, potentially dangerous, but deeply mystical being. It is said to be a guardian of the pristine wilderness, an entity that commands respect rather than incites mere fear. Many traditional stories describe the Yeti as having a spiritual essence, capable of becoming invisible at will or wielding a potent, paralyzing whistle that can disorient those who venture too deep into its domain. This cultural backdrop is crucial. For the people who live in the shadow of these peaks, the Yeti is a tangible expression of the mountain's immense, untamable power, a reminder that humans are merely guests in a world ruled by older, stronger forces. The legend exploded into Western consciousness during the great age of Himalayan exploration in the early and mid-20th century. While whispers and travelers' tales had existed for decades, it was a single piece of evidence that seared the Yeti into the global mind. In 1951, British explorer Eric Shipton, while reconnoitering Mount Everest, photographed a series of enormous, mysterious footprints in the Menlung Basin. The images were startlingly clear, a set of broad, human-like impressions marching purposefully across the snow, each one featuring a distinct, thumb-like toe. Shipton's photograph became the Rosetta Stone of Yeti lore, an iconic image that seemed to provide undeniable physical proof of something extraordinary walking the high glaciers. This single photograph did more than any story could. It offered a tantalizing, objective clue that fueled decades of subsequent expeditions and speculation. It suggested that this was not just a folk tale, but a zoological mystery waiting to be solved. Spurred by such evidence, a wave of well-funded expeditions set out to capture the beast or find conclusive proof. The most famous of these was the 1960–1961 Sir Edmund Hillary expedition, sponsored by the World Book Encyclopedia. Hillary, the first man to summit Everest, took the quest seriously, employing advanced technology for the time and even bringing along Marlon Perkins, the host of the television program Wild Kingdom. The expedition gathered what was considered the best physical evidence available, supposed Yeti relics housed in remote monasteries. The most prized of these were the Yeti scalps kept at Pangboch and Kumjung monasteries, and a mummified Yeti hand revered as a sacred object. For centuries, these artifacts had been presented to pilgrims and visitors as proof of the creature's existence, tangible objects of veneration in a culture that accepted the Yeti as real. The Western world held its breath, anticipating that science was on the verge of confirming one of history's greatest legends. But when these holy relics were subjected to rigorous scientific analysis, the results were deeply disappointing for cryptozoologists. The revered scalps, upon microscopic and morphological examination, were not the head coverings of an unknown primate. Instead, they were identified as pieces of skin and fur from the Sero, a goat-like antelope native to the Himalayas, which had been ritualistically shaped and stitched over the years. The mummified hand from Pangboch, once thought to be uniquely human-like yet monstrously large, was also revealed to be human after all. It was a clever, centuries-old fabrication, likely created from a human hand and augmented with other animal parts to create a sacred relic that reinforced the local belief system. This did not necessarily mean the monks were intentionally deceiving people. Rather, they were preserving objects that symbolized a deeply held spiritual truth, objects that the Western world had mistaken for literal zoological evidence. So, if the best physical relics were debunked, what are people actually seeing and hearing in the high Himalayas? Modern science offers several compelling and far more probable explanations. The primary suspect is the region's native bear population. The Himalayan brown bear and the Tibetan blue bear are large, often bipedal animals that can, when walking on their hind legs through snow, leave footprints that bear a striking resemblance to the iconic Shipton photo. As the animal walks, its footprints can melt and distort in the sun, merging and elongating to create a single, large, seemingly humanoid track. Genetic analysis has further solidified this theory. In recent years, scientists have conducted DNA testing on numerous hair, fur, and fecal samples attributed to the Yeti, collected from across the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayas. Overwhelmingly, the results have pointed to known local fauna. The vast majority of these samples have been identified as belonging to various species of bears, from the Asian black bear to the Himalayan brown bear. Other samples have been traced to more mundane sources like horses, cows, and even a sample from a taxidermied specimen that turned out to be from a Sero. This genetic evidence strongly suggests that the legendary Yeti is in fact a composite of misidentified bears and other wildlife. Their presence in the harsh, high-altitude environment interpreted through a lens of ancient folklore and the human desire for mystery. Yet, even with this mountain of scientific counter-evidence, the Yeti refuses to be driven from its icy throne. Its role in Western pop culture has ensured its immortality. It became the ultimate what-if creature, a staple of B-movies, comic books, and children's cartoons, often portrayed as a shaggy, gentle giant or a fearsome, territorial monster. From the classic stop-motion animation in the 1957 film The Abominable Snowman to its appearances in everything from Scooby-Doo to monster trucks, the Yeti has become a versatile and enduring character. This pop culture presence, divorced from the scientific debate, keeps the legend alive in the public consciousness. It speaks to a deeper yearning for a world still wild enough to hide its own giants, for the idea that the highest, most remote places on Earth might still shelter a remnant of a forgotten age. The Yeti, therefore, exists in a dual state. It is both a culturally significant figure for the people of the Himalayas, a spiritual symbol of the mountain's raw power, and a global icon of adventure and the unknown. Whether it is a flesh and blood animal waiting to be discovered or a magnificent myth born from the shadows of towering peaks and the tracks of bears, the abominable snowman remains the undisputed monarch of the high mountains, a ghost in the snow that continues to capture our wonder and haunt our expeditions into the thin, cold air of the roof of the world. While our previous legends often promised curses and peril, our next myth offers a tantalizing prize that has captivated humanity's deepest yearning for millennia, the Fountain of Youth. This is not a story of a haunted place, but of a sacred source, a spring of water believed to restore youth and grant immortality to anyone who drinks or bathes in its waters. The quest for this fabled fountain is perhaps the most personal and universal of all historical mysteries, driven by a fear of death and a longing for endless vitality that resonates as powerfully today as it did in the age of exploration. While the name is inextricably linked to the Spanish conquistador Juan Ponce de Leon, the legend's roots are far older, flowing from the very cradle of Western civilization. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, spoke of a fountain of the sun in Ethiopia whose waters bestowed an incredibly long and vigorous life. These early tales established a pattern that would repeat for centuries, a magical water source always located in a distant, exotic, and just out of reach land, waiting for a worthy hero to discover its secret. The myth was powerfully supercharged in the Middle Ages with the legend of Prester John, a mythical Christian king and priest believed to rule a vast utopian kingdom overflowing with wealth and marvels somewhere in the Orient. Letters purportedly from this monarch, which circulated throughout Europe, described his realm in fantastical detail, and nestled within his domain was a fountain of youth that restored the aged to their prime. This fusion of Christian piety with the promise of earthly immortality made the legend incredibly potent for a Europe steeped in faith and fascinated by the unknown East. The dream of finding Prester John's kingdom, and with it the miraculous fountain, became a powerful motivator for exploration, blending the desire for spiritual alliance against Islamic powers with the alluring, personal goal of conquering mortality itself. These ancient and medieval streams of thought converged and were swept across the Atlantic by the tidal wave of the Age of Discovery, where they would find a new home in the lush, unfamiliar landscape of the New World. It is here that the figure of Juan Ponce de Leon sails permanently into the story. According to the popular narrative, the aging conquistador, who had already made a name for himself as the first governor of Puerto Rico, embarked on a specific expedition in 1513 to find the island of Bimini and its legendary spring. The tale suggests he was driven by a desire to restore his own youth or to find a cure for his impotence, a quest that seems ripped from a chivalric romance. The historical record, however, is more nuanced and arguably more fascinating. While there is no direct evidence from Ponce de Leon's own writings that he was explicitly searching for a fountain, the chroniclers who documented his journey a generation later firmly embedded the legend into his mission. The indigenous peoples of the Caribbean, particularly the Taino and Arawak, spoke of a mythical land to the north called Bimini, a place of great riches and restorative waters. For the Spanish, already primed by the Prester John legends, these native stories were not just folklore, they were corroboration. They represented a tangible, geographical clue to a mystery they already believed in. When Ponce de Leon first sighted the verdant coast during the Easter season, which in Spanish is known as Pascua Florida, or the Feast of Flowers, he named the land La Florida. In doing so, he forever linked this new, promising territory with the blossoming hope of renewal and eternal life. The association was solidified by the very geography of Florida itself. The peninsula is a vast limestone plateau, acting as a giant filter for rainwater that percolates down to form one of the largest aquifers in the world. This geological reality results in an abundance of natural springs, thousands of them, where crystal clear, cool water bubbles up from the earth with tremendous force. For the European explorers, accustomed to often polluted water sources, these pristine, constantly flowing springs must have seemed miraculous. Here was tangible proof, clean, life-giving water emerging from the ground in a seemingly endless supply. It required only a small leap of imagination to see these springs, particularly in such a strange and biologically rich new world as the very fountains described in the ancient texts. The legend became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The search for the fountain of youth led explorers to a land filled with remarkable springs, and the presence of those springs, in turn, confirmed that they were on the right path. This fusion of myth and landscape created an enduring legacy, one that would draw countless fortune seekers and health pilgrims to Florida for centuries to come. Beyond the historical searches and geographical coincidences, the true power of the Fountain of Youth lies in its profound psychological and metaphorical resonance. It is the ultimate symbol of humanity's battle against our greatest and most certain foe, time itself. The legend speaks to a universal desire to halt the decay of the body, to reclaim lost vitality, and to have more time for love, for adventure, for knowledge. This core appeal has made it an endlessly adaptable narrative in literature and art. Geoffrey Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales has his aged character, the wife of Bath, lamenting the loss of her youth and beauty, a poignant expression of the very desire the fountain promises to quench. The myth was a central motif in the Alexander Romance, a vast body of legends about Alexander the Great, where the famed conqueror and his cook stumble upon a life-restoring spring, only to have the servant's youth renewed while Alexander, through a tragic error, misses his chance at immortality. This story beautifully captures the bittersweet irony and elusive nature of the quest. In the modern era, the Fountain of Youth has lost none of its symbolic potency, seamlessly transitioning from ancient legend to a staple of contemporary fantasy. It serves as a powerful plot device to explore the unforeseen consequences of achieving eternal life, often revealing that immortality can be a curse rather than a blessing. In his satirical novel Gulliver's Travels, Jonathan Swift presents the Struldbrugs, a race of people who are immortal but continue to age, becoming increasingly frail, forgetful, and miserable, offering a chilling cautionary tale about the difference between endless life and meaningful life. More recently, the myth was brilliantly reimagined in the blockbuster film Pirates of the Caribbean. On stranger tides, where the fountain becomes the object of a fierce rivalry between the Spanish Navy, the British Crown, and pirates, its power requiring a specific ritual and a terrible sacrifice. These modern interpretations continue to ask the same fundamental questions that drove Ponce de Leon. What would we sacrifice for more time? Would living forever truly be a gift, or would it rob life of its precious, fleeting beauty? The Fountain of Youth, therefore, endures not because we still believe in a magical spring in Florida, but because it represents an eternal, internal human struggle. It is a mirror reflecting our deepest anxieties about aging and death, and our most fervent and perhaps foolish hope that we might one day find a way to drink deeply from the well of time itself. Yet even amidst the grand searches for eternal youth and life, another legend speaks of a far more burdensome form of immortality, one not of restoration but of endless, weary wandering. This is the haunting tale of the Wandering Jew, a figure born from medieval Christian folklore who embodies a profound and troubling curse. The core of the legend is always the same: a man in Jerusalem, witnessing Jesus struggling under the weight of the cross on his way to Calvary, taunts or refuses him a moment of rest. For this act of profound disrespect, the man is cursed by Jesus to walk the earth without rest or death until the second coming. He is an eternal witness, a living ghost forced to observe the passage of centuries, forever reminded of his singular moment of blasphemy. The name Jew was attached to this figure, with early versions often naming him as a shoemaker or cartwright named Ahasuerus, though the specifics of his identity varied from telling to telling. More than just a ghost story, this myth became a powerful vehicle for theological lessons about compassion, the gravity of sin, and the inescapable nature of divine judgment, serving as a walking, talking cautionary tale for the faithful. Over the centuries, this foundational story spawned countless variations, each reflecting the anxieties and prejudices of its time. In some versions, the Wandering Jew is a deeply remorseful figure, eternally penitent and filled with a sorrowful wisdom gained from his centuries of observation. He appears at pivotal moments in history, offering cryptic prophecies or serving as a somber reminder of Christ's passion. In other, darker iterations, he is a more sinister presence, an omen of plague or misfortune, his endless life a mark of divine wrath rather than a path to redemption. His physical description also evolved. He was often portrayed as an old, weary man with a long white beard, unable to settle in any one place, compelled to move on after a few decades lest his agelessness arouse suspicion. These stories spread like wildfire across Europe, documented in church chronicles, popular pamphlets, and travelers' accounts, with alleged sightings of the wanderer reported from Brussels to Hamburg to Moscow, giving the myth a chilling veneer of credibility. Tragically, the very structure of this legend made it a potent and enduring vehicle for antisemitism. By specifically identifying the offender as a Jew, the myth reinforced a dangerous and hateful narrative already prevalent in medieval Europe, that the Jewish people were collectively responsible for the death of Christ and were therefore a people condemned by God to be perpetual outsiders without a homeland, forever suffering for their alleged ancestral sin. The wandering Jew became the archetype of this eternal outsider, a spectral representation of the Jewish diaspora itself. In an era of pogroms and expulsions, this figure served to justify the persecution of real Jewish communities. He was depicted in woodcuts and sermons as a gaunt, haunted figure, his endless wandering a divine punishment that was seen as deserved, effectively blaming an entire people for the actions of a single, mythical individual and using that story to legitimize their marginalization and violence against them. As the Enlightenment dawned, the figure of the wandering Jew began to be reinterpreted, stripped of some of his overtly religious trappings and transformed in literature and art. He was no longer solely a religious warning but became a rich symbol of existential dread and the human condition. In this new light, his curse was not just about blasphemy, but about the burden of memory itself, the agony of witnessing all of history's triumphs and tragedies without being able to truly participate or find release in death. The German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe sketched plans for an epic poem about him, and Percy Bysshe Shelley referenced him in his poetry, seeing in the wanderer a romantic, tragic hero. Perhaps the most famous literary reinvention came from the French writer Eugène Sue in his 1844 serialized novel, Le Juif Errant, The Wandering Jew. Sue's version transformed the character into a more sympathetic figure, using his eternal life to critique social injustice and the corruption of the Catholic Church, shifting the narrative from one of divine punishment to one of humanitarian compassion. Despite these more nuanced literary interpretations, the damaging power of the original anti-Semitic trope proved tenacious. The image of the wandering Jew was enthusiastically adopted by Nazi propagandists in the 20th century, who weaponized the ancient myth to fuel their genocidal ideology. They depicted Jews as rootless, parasitic figures, echoing the medieval curse of eternal wandering to argue for their removal from European society. This horrific co-opting of the legend demonstrated with terrifying clarity how a centuries-old folktale could be twisted to justify the most extreme forms of bigotry and violence, directly contributing to the poisonous atmosphere that made the Holocaust possible. It stands as a stark lesson in how mythology, when fused with hatred, can have catastrophic real-world consequences, moving from the pages of devotional texts to the machinery of state-sponsored murder. In the decades following World War II and the show, the Wandering Jew legend has largely receded from popular consciousness, its overtly anti-Semitic connotations widely recognized and rejected. The figure occasionally resurfaces in modern culture, but often in a secularized or metaphorical form as a time traveler, an immortal witness in science fiction, or a symbol of the refugee experience. This gradual fading is a sign of a more sensitive and historically aware society, one that understands the profound harm such stereotypes can cause. Yet, the story retains a certain philosophical power when separated from its hateful origins. It continues to make us ponder the weight of history, the nature of guilt and redemption, and the profound human fear not of dying, but of being denied the peace of death. The Wandering Jew endures not as a credible specter to be feared, but as a complex cultural artifact, a reminder of the long and painful history of religious persecution, and a testament to the way a single story can be reshaped over centuries, from a tool of oppression to a subject of somber reflection on the eternal struggle between sin, punishment, and the elusive hope for an end to suffering. And now, we surface from the haunted forests and cursed shores to confront a terror born in the crushing, lightless abyss of the open ocean, a being so colossal it could blot out the sea itself. This is the legend of the Kraken, the ultimate sea monster of Norse sailor lore, a creature of such immense and terrifying power that its very name has become synonymous with the hidden horrors of the deep. For centuries, the sailors of Norway and Greenland whispered of a monstrous entity that dwelled in the frigid northern waters, a beast not merely large but of almost incomprehensible scale. They spoke of a floating island that was no island at all, describing a creature so vast that its back, when it rose from the depths, could be mistaken for land, covered in seaweed and swarming with fish. But this was no placid leviathan. It was a demon of the deep, armed with arms as thick as ships' masts and longer than the tallest pine, capable of wrapping around the largest vessel and pulling it down into a vortex of its own making, drowning every soul on board in a churning grave of foam and splintered wood. The earliest roots of this leviathan are tangled in the rich tapestry of Icelandic sagas and natural histories. The 13th century text known as the Orvar Otter Saga contains one of the oldest known descriptions, speaking of a monstrous sea creature called the Hafgjufar, or sea mist, a beast so enormous it could swallow men, ships, and even whales in a single gulp. A century later, another Icelandic work, the Konungs Skuggjaw, or King's Mirror, described a beast seen in the Greenland seas that was large enough to be mistaken for a row of islands, a creature whose breath could foul the air and whose appetite was boundless. These were not yet the detailed cephalopod we imagine today, but rather a more general, primordial horror, a vague, island-sized monstrosity that embodied every sailor's fear of the featureless, open ocean and the unknown life it might conceal. The name Kraken itself is believed to derive from the Norwegian word krak, meaning a twisted or crooked animal, a term that perfectly evokes the image of its sinuous, coiling limbs. It was in the 18th century that the Kraken truly took its classic form, thanks in large part to the systematic work of the Danish historian and Bishop Erik Pontoppidan. In his 1752 Natural History of Norway, Pontoppidan collected and codified the sailors' yarns, presenting the Kraken as a real, if fantastical, part of the natural world. He described it explicitly as a kind of giant squid or starfish, estimating its circumference to be over 1.5 miles. He detailed its method of attack, noting how it would rise to the surface, creating a dangerous whirlpool as it submerged, and how its body emitted a pungent, overwhelming odor that could attract vast schools of fish, a phenomenon fishermen supposedly exploited at the risk of their very lives. Pontoppidan's work was pivotal. It transformed the Kraken from a vague folkloric terror into a specific, almost scientific nightmare, giving it a defined shape and a set of terrifying behaviors that captured the European imagination. This newly crystallized monster then swam effortlessly into the heart of Western literature, where its legend was magnified and romanticized. The poet Alfred Lord Tennyson immortalized it in his 1830 sonnet, The Kraken, painting a haunting picture of the beast slumbering in ancient, dreamless, uninvaded sleep in the abyssal depths, only to rise once at the apocalypse to die in a burst of fire and fury at the surface. But perhaps the single most influential portrayal came from Jules Verne in his 1870 masterpiece, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. In one of the novel's most iconic scenes, Captain Nemo's submarine, the Nautilus, is attacked by a pack of giant squids. Verne's gripping, visceral description of the battle, the pale, globular bodies, the parrot-like beaks, the long, serpentine arms clutching at the vessel, and a crew member, fused the Kraken myth with the emerging reality of the giant squid in the public's mind. This dramatic confrontation, illustrated so vividly in subsequent film adaptations, cemented the image of the tentacled deep-sea terror for all time, making the Kraken a permanent fixture of adventure fiction. Yet behind every great myth often lies a kernel of terrifying truth, and the Kraken is no exception. For generations, the giant squid, genus Architeuthis, was the stuff of legend itself. Sailors' tales of encountering these creatures were dismissed as fantasy or mistaken identity, and the only evidence was the occasional, massive carcass that washed ashore, a decaying, mysterious marvel. The myth of the Kraken was, in all likelihood, a direct result of real, terrifying encounters with these elusive giants of the deep. A giant squid can grow to staggering proportions, with the largest specimens measuring over 40 feet in length, including their 2 long feeding tentacles. Their eyes are the size of dinner plates, an adaptation for seeing in the perpetual darkness of the deep ocean. To a wooden sailing ship crewed by superstitious men, the sudden appearance of such an alien, powerful creature, its pale body ghostly in the North Atlantic gloom, would have been a sight of pure, unadulterated horror. The creature's strong, sucker-lined arms could indeed latch onto a ship, and while it is unlikely a single squid could drag a large vessel under, the struggle would have been violent and chaotic enough to fuel stories of entire fleets being lost to the monster's embrace. The legacy of the Kraken is as deep and far-reaching as the oceans it was said to inhabit. It stands as the archetypal deep-sea terror, the ultimate symbol of the unknown that lies beneath the waves. It represents a primal human fear, the fear of being attacked and consumed by something we cannot see or understand, a force of nature that is both immense and utterly alien. This powerful image has ensured its survival far beyond the age of sail. The Kraken has been unleashed in countless modern films, from the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, where it serves as a fearsome tool for the villainous Davy Jones, to the climactic attack in Clash of the Titans. It thrives in video games, literature, and even as the beloved logo of a certain Seattle hockey team. The name is now casually used to describe anything of overwhelming size or power, from a massive military force to a complex software program. The Kraken endures because the deep ocean remains one of the last truly unexplored frontiers on our planet. Even with our advanced submersibles and sonar mapping, we have surveyed more of the surface of Mars than we have of our own ocean floor. In that enduring mystery, the Kraken still swims. It is no longer just a giant squid, but a permanent specter in our collective consciousness, a reminder that the sea, for all its beauty, still holds dark places where legends can and do come to life. And there we have it, 30 of history's most eerie and captivating myths and legends. From the glittering curse of the Hope Diamond to the silent mystery of the Mary Celeste, and from the spectral rider of Sleepy Hollow to the enduring enigma of the Loch Ness Monster, we have journeyed across centuries and continents, exploring the shadows that linger at the edges of our understanding. These stories are far more than simple campfire tales. They are powerful cultural artifacts that reflect our deepest anxieties, our fear of the dark, of the deep sea, of betrayal, and of forces beyond our control. They speak to a fundamental part of the human spirit, an insatiable curiosity about the world and a longing for mysteries that defy the rigid explanations of science and history. Each legend, whether rooted in tragic fact or born from pure imagination, serves as a poignant reminder that our past is not a neatly sorted collection of dates and events, but a rich, complicated tapestry woven with threads of wonder, fear, and the unexplained. We are drawn to these tales not in spite of their ambiguity, but because of it. They keep the world feeling vast, unpredictable, and endlessly fascinating. Now we pass the torch to you. Which of these 30 legends sent the most profound shiver down your spine? Was it the chilling intelligence of the Bell Witch, the cosmic terror of the Tunguska event, or the heartbreaking mystery of the Lost Colony of Roanoke? Perhaps you have a favorite local myth from your own hometown or region, a story passed down through generations that we didn't get to cover today. The world is full of these whispers from the past, and your stories are a vital part of that ongoing conversation. We would be absolutely fascinated to hear them. Share your thoughts, your personal connections, and your own eerie tales in the comments section below. Let's keep this exploration of the mysterious past alive together. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell so you never miss another adventure when we delve into the hidden corners of history, science, and folklore. Thank you so much for watching and for sharing this journey into the shadows. Until our next adventure into the mysterious past, keep looking, keep questioning, and above